but we're gonna get started here. So, good morning, good morning, good morning, and thank you for not considering it robbery to give me your Saturday, especially since the weatherman lied and it is no longer raining outside. And naturally the cameraman is gonna hold me up.
I'm ready.
Not you, you a diligent cameraman, that was there.
While you're being held up.
Okay, can you hear back me? Can you hear back there? Listen, I am so honored by that queen because normally I'm the girl with the big mouth, so for somebody to come and say they can't hear me in the back, I'm loving you.
I'm saying we can't hear next door because you're...
Oh, well, they're going to have to close that door back there.
It's going through the...
I'm so sorry. Close that door back there. Thank you. Okay, so good morning.
Good morning.
Again. The crazy lady, my name is Tracy Hartney Scott, and I am the housing chair of the Richmond chapter of the NAACP. And I'm so thankful that you guys came out this morning for this serious conversation. Just a little housekeeping. If you would please put your cell phones on vibrate. You don't have to turn them off, but please put them on vibrate. We would appreciate it. Otherwise, we will call you out. We will be taking questions, so there's paper in the back if you want to write it. If you're not a person that wants a microphone in your face, there will be an opportunity for you to ask us questions. We have an esteemed panel here today that we are going to introduce to you in a few minutes. But again, thank you so much for coming out. We're going to be talking and we're going to be having, I always tell people I come with a warning label. This is not a symposium of what you think. This is real conversation. Real conversation. We're not going to sugarcoat anything. We're not here to make you feel warm and fuzzy. We're here to get to the root of what the serious problems are and then offer solutions. This is one of 4 of our housing justice symposiums. So I'm going to go out of order from the program because I have a queen here that has pressed on for me, and I'm so appreciative for her because she has another meeting. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to my sister. You're fine? Well, you're writing in order. I'm going with the program. Writing in order, I'd like to introduce you Delegate Dolores McQuinn, okay, from the 70th District. And I love you, Queen. Good morning.
Good morning. I was trying to get a break there for 1 second.
That's fine.
There is no break. Good morning. Bless you. Bless you.
You got the perfect set, don't you?
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. So delighted to be here and delighted to see each of you here this morning. Tracy, thank you and the NAACP for your work and your interest in this and what you're doing to make sure that attention is brought to a critical issue that we are facing in the city of Richmond and actually across the country. So much appreciation to all that you all have done. And I hope that today will be certainly enlightening to those who don't realize that we have such a critical issue that we are dealing with in the city. But it is just wonderful to bring attention to this. Again, it's not just in the city, Richmond or Metro, but across America. Something that we all need to be focusing on. Housing inequities have certainly increased, and the disparity, the gap in Metro Richmond certainly has gotten, we're actually alarming, wider. Matter of fact, as I was coming here, Michelle, I was looking at all of the places that are being, areas, little spots being developed and housing or apartment condos that are going there, and then you see a little sign on the side that says $300,000 and up. And I'm like, you know what, I've been blessed, but I don't know if I could afford one of those condos. And so I know what other people are faced. These geographical areas are are always similar in nature. You look at the correlation between the inequities, and then you look at social deprivation. So there's no secret there. The variables are, as they have always been, are racial issues, social, income, and wealth inequality. Economic equality, from a noted economist, said that is a primary contributing factor to housing inequities. And it's been lingering in America and many localities across this nation and area, and it's generational deprivation. It is, you can, matter of fact, just backpedal to before emancipation and even after emancipation, Jim Crow, and you realize that the inequities have existed. And so we have understand historically and socially that deprivations have been obstacles that have prevented certainly African Americans and other people of color from securing and accumulating assets and wealth. And with quality housing, when you look at it being high on the list of areas that have been that they have been deprived of, or we've been deprived of. I mean, you look at the whole issue of poverty, you know, and here in certainly Metro and City of Richmond, there's an office now, Community Wealth Building, that they're trying to look at some of these issues. But when you've had something that have existed historically for so long, it's going to take years to address this and hopefully bring some resolution to it. The rate last year, the poverty rate actually was 24.6%, and that includes Metro Richmond. So we were one of the highest actually across the nation. So hopefully that through what they're doing in the city, that this will help to address this most challenging issues of people certainly who are living in poverty for generations. And again, as I said, it's been centuries in the making. Our story again is similar to those other places across this nation. So not only are we challenged by the lack of resources, but in Richmond now, the economic exclusion comes through gentrification, displacement of lower income families as a result of gentrification. And the common thought has been that if you bring more affluent families into a community, white families move into the community, but what's happening across the nation, and we probably should have gotten in front of this, you move them in, or they move in more affluent, and then it forces those who've been living there for many, many years, some generation, it forces them out. And it's, when I look at it, as I said earlier, well, you know, a few moments ago, that we probably should have looked at that issue a lot earlier and began just as we have across, you know, master plans for Charco Bottom, master plan for downtown, master plan for this. We should have created or had a master plan for affordable housing in the city of Richmond. And that we could have probably gotten in front of some of what's going on. But now the Campbell's nose is in the tent, and I have seen communities drastically change overnight, it appears. But not only when this happens do you begin to lose those who have lived there for a while, but you know, as a result of economic inequality, but you also begin to lose the culture that existed. The wealthier and the higher property rate goes out, and so higher rent, toll changes in the culture of the community. And so it's not just about wealthier people moving into the neighborhood, but it's the elimination of affordable housing. So investors, developers find these areas to be profitable for them. And then a final statement I want to talk to you about just for a moment is what has happened as a result of that, all of the changes that have been made, as well as the political, it is going to be impacted. And so the representation that you have seen changing over the years, have also been a result of what has happened as it relates to gentrification in the various communities. It was interesting as I was just trying to pull some notes together to talk about the culture and what has changed. I was at an event last year where, and it really was just, I guess, a rally call to invite people to come out and talk about how important voting is. The next thing I know, there are police officers riding up. Nothing was going on. People were having a wonderful time, great spirit, great present, eating, drinking, Pepsis and water, and being merry. And all of a sudden, the police rolled in and said, the police have been called on you all. And my question was, for what reason? So when you talk about culture changes as well, nobody calls anyone when there's a beer event going on. No one calls when, not Shamrock, the event that happens on Broad Street and the streets are closed. Everybody's eating, drinking, being merry, having fun. But again, when it tends, when those cultures, when those things change, and African Americans seem to be more present or prevalent at those particular events, then all of a sudden it's a problem. Finally, the elephant in the room is the exposure of this week about the young lady who was treated as if, I don't know of anyone that I would have talked to that way. I know of no one, okay? But to have a property owner talk to a young lady that way, or talk to anyone, to have that kind of mistreatment, which speaks to this whole issue of hierarchy, this whole issue of, I guess, privilege, with the understanding that this woman, young lady, probably was, maybe in a economically, her status was not one that she could go and buy a house or live in a condo or whatnot. And so my concern was, when people are truly disadvantaged, marginalized, ostracized, they're in poverty and whatnot, the nerve and the audacity, some of the names that he said to her, I wish I could say it to him, but it's against my religion, so I can't say it. But I do say the audacity, of someone who supposedly, owning about 200 properties across Metro Richmond and whatnot, to treat someone like that, to look down on someone. And my thing is, don't look down on anyone unless you're trying to pick them up. But again, it speaks to privilege. And I wouldn't say that everyone is like that, but just the fact that he did that. And so I said to the NAACP, Tracy, and all who are involved, when people serve you injustice on a platter, we don't have to eat it. We don't have to take it. It doesn't have to be our entree. We have to go after them. And I'm saying that I'm here, I'm ready, I'm equipped, I've been doing some homework, and this young man or old man or whoever he is, he just doesn't know that he just bit off more than he can chew. Thank you, and I appreciate what you allowed me to be here to see.
Thank you, Delegate McQuinn. At this time, right and in order, I'd like to introduce to you, to give our welcome, the President of the Richmond chapter of the NAACP, Mr. James, we call him JJ Minor.
Good morning to all.
Good morning.
And thank you, Tracy, for putting this together. This is a beautiful audience, this house symposium. which is one of 4 that Trace is working on for this year. And I want to say just welcome to each of you all. You know, my name is James Minor. I'm the president of Richmond, Virginia branch, NAACP, Unit 7112. The national NAACP was founded in 1909. The Richmond, Virginia chapter was founded in 1917, whereas Maggie Walker was the first vice president of our branch. And our mission is to ensure the political, social, educational, and economic equality rights of all persons and to eliminate race-based discrimination. That is who we are, that is why we're here, that is why we will always continue to exist. We are the oldest and the boldest civil rights organization in this country. This is definitely needed. In times like these, we probably should have done it a long time ago, but I thank God Trace is here because she's picked up the ball and she's bouncing and she's rolling. You know, there are several issues with housing, which is affordable housing, gentrification, you talk about homelessness, many issues, and we're here to help tackle those issues. You know, one thing that I'm trying to push for is to make sure that when we talk about affordable housing is spread throughout the whole city and not just in black neighborhoods, if you will. You know, let's put some affordable housing out there by Windsor Farms or Stony Point, you know, and you can tell them I said it, signed, sent, envelope, and delivered. That's what we need to work on. You know, you talk about homelessness. Homelessness is an issue in Richmond. You talk about discriminatory practices from private developers or private property owners. There are so many issues that we need to tackle, but this is a start. And we're here, and I also ask that you would join our organization because we need help. Tracy and the Housing Committee cannot do it alone. There are so many housing issues that folks are, and complaints that are coming to us that we cannot handle them all, but we are taking them one at a time. And we need to expand the Housing Committee. I see so many friends here, and so many folks. We need your help. The NAACP can't do it alone. We need partners. We need to go into communities and educate folks on their rights, and also educate and also talk to them about what you can't do in properties as well, because you do have some problems from the tenants as well. So that's why we're here. Again, I'd like to say thank you for coming. May God bless you, and may peace, love, joy, happiness, and prosperity continue to radiate throughout your lives. God bless you. Thank you so much. See Michelle.
Before I introduce our next speaker, I'd like, if there are any other members of the NAACP, just please stand. We have members, we have our director at large, we have our members of our executive team, we have our community coordinator, Charles Willis, we have our chair for communications, so thank y'all for pressing on. And do we have any advocates in the house?
Yeah, definitely.
Well, we know we got some advocates, but I mean, I see some advocates in the house. Okay, so we're gonna wave to you too. Okay, so without further ado, I'd like to introduce to you a gentleman who keeps me straight and pretty much every property manager in the city of Richmond. He's a wealth of knowledge. Most people say that they can't get to legal aid. I can get to legal aid, so call me. Okay, and so at this time I'd like to introduce Martin Wegbright. He is the Director of Litigation for the Central Virginia Legal Aid Society. And during this past General Assembly, a lot of landlord-tenant bills were passed. Delegate McQuinn and a lot of other really work diligently, and there's a few that's going into effect on July 1st, and we find that one of the things that we always say is lack of knowledge and the people perish.
That's right.
Okay, and so we have to make sure that we start teaching people to advocate for themselves, and the only way that they can do that is if we bring the knowledge to them. We can't expect them, everybody doesn't have Google, everybody doesn't have access to a computer. So he's gonna bring some information in a PowerPoint presentation, so please receive him.
Thank you, Tracy. I'm gonna bring the PowerPoint back up.
I think when they hit that button, it's there.
Yeah, we also have to scroll. myself. This is my 40th year in legal aid. The last 38 years have been in Virginia, and the last 14 years have been right here in Richmond. I have worked for Central Virginia Legal Aid Society as the Director of Litigation that entire time. And let me just tell you briefly what Central Virginia Legal Aid is. There's a information sheet in the back, and we provide free civil, non-criminal legal aid to low-income people, not only in Richmond, but in Petersburg, Charlottesville, and also the surrounding cities and counties. We do a lot of housing law, as well as family law, consumer law, public benefits, employment law, elder law, things of that nature. We are not terribly well funded. In our 3 offices, we have a total of 12 attorneys. And in the area that we serve, which is 5 cities and 15 independent, and 5 cities and 15 counties, there are 226,000 eligible low-income people. So we don't have the resources to provide an attorney for every single person who wants one and needs one. But we do try to provide attorneys in cases that are most critical to people's lives. And that clearly includes eviction defense. One of the things I want to talk about, and there's a flyer back there, is we got a grant earlier this year to have a courthouse housing law outreach attorney. That office opened literally this Monday. And so every day at the John Marshall Courthouse on the 2nd floor in room 214, we have at least 1 and probably 2 attorneys. The main one who's going to be there is a young lady, a young African-American lady by the name of Janae Craddock. Some of you may know her. She was an assistant Commonwealth attorney for 10 years. She knows everybody in the courthouse. She knows the clerks, the judges, the sheriffs, the bailiffs, everything. And she was totally a dream hire for us. So she will be there every morning on Monday through Friday from a little after 9 until a little after 11:15, helping tenants on the spot, at a very minimum, giving them legal advice. And if they have a meritorious defense, which Janae will explore during the time she has to do that, telling them how to go to court and go in front of the judge and get the case set for trial. And then we can later evaluate whether we can provide an attorney. But the whole purpose of it is to provide a lot more attorneys. So I've got 2 cute stories about our courthouse housing law outreach attorney. One of which is, if you look at the Virginia Mercury, which is an online paper, Ned Oliver, who used to write for the Richmond Times-Dispatch, now writes for the Virginia Mercury. And there's a story from Wednesday that talks about the courthouse housing law outreach attorney. There's also a story from Monday, of course, about the landlord, Dean Parsons. And on Monday, I gave a hard copy of that story to Janae. I didn't know whether she had seen it or not. And she said, yeah, I just got a case against him. He's gonna love me. So, without further ado, let me get into the PowerPoint. So, America has an eviction epidemic, and Richmond, Virginia is patient 0. You've all seen the statistics about our high eviction rate and our sister cities in Virginia that have similarly high, if not higher, eviction rates. This problem didn't develop overnight. It's been developing over the past 20 years. And it doesn't have one cause, it has at least a dozen causes. Some of those causes we've already talked about. I'm not going to talk about all of these. I'm going to talk about just 2 of them. The government-sponsored segregation and our older substandard housing stock. So, what we're showing you now are 2 maps. One is a 1937 redlining map. This was prepared by the federal government. It shows the areas of Richmond where people were told, don't make loans, don't sell insurance, these are deteriorating areas. That's, of course, where people of color were living. The next map next to it, 79 years later, is the Richmond eviction map prepared by RVA Eviction Lab at VCU. And it shows the darker the shading, the higher the eviction rate. it's the same map. 79 years apart, it's the same map. So in Richmond, Virginia, it's all about race. The other map I want to show you is, again, another map prepared by RVA Eviction Lab. And these dots, the red and blue dots, are either unsafe or unfit structures. And they are superimposed on, again, a map of Richmond showing the eviction rate from lighter shades to darker shades. And as you can tell, it's almost a perfect match. Where the dots are where the high eviction rates are. And it's the same map. It starts just to the east of Chamberlain Ave, it swings through the east end, it jumps across the river, it goes south of Manchester, it goes along Hull Street, and it's the same redlining map we saw, it's the same high eviction map that we saw. And it's about code violations as well. Now, let's talk about some of the changes that are going to take effect on July 1, thanks to the General Assembly and thanks to very hard work of tenant advocates. And I have to give credit to the industry as well, because they came to the realization they needed to make some changes. And these changes were negotiated and fought over, but ultimately passed. So, number one, written leases are required. Under the current law, there is no requirement of a written lease. So landlords and tenants don't know what their rights and responsibilities are. Under the new law, the landlord has to offer a 12-month lease. We'll go back on that. And if the landlord does not do that, under the new law, the landlord has to offer a written lease. It could be month to month, it could be 12 months, but it has to be a written lease, so everybody knows what the terms are. If the landlord does not do that, then the law imposes a default lease, which is a 12-month lease, rent paid in monthly payments, due on the 1st, late after the 5th. A reasonable late fee can be charged, security deposit no more than 2 months' rent. And this landlord and tenant can still enter into a different written lease, but finally, in 2019, we have a requirement that there be a written lease. Change number 2, one case at a time and required evidence. So under the current law, the landlord can file an unlawful detainer, an eviction case, every month that rent is unpaid and due. So if rent is due for May, they file in May. By the time June comes up, June rent is due, and they file a June case. By the time June case comes up, July is due, and they file a July case. And we see this all the time. What that means is instead of one late fee, one filing fee, and one attorney's fees, there's 3 late fees, 3 filing fees, and 3 attorney's fees. That jacks up the cost for tenants, makes them unable to stay in their places, and it also imposes additional unnecessary costs on landlords. Starting July 1, if non-payment of rent is the only issue, 1 lawsuit at a time. That's going to help both sides keep down the costs. 1 late fee, 1 filing fee, 1 attorney fee, not 3. Another change in that same law is that the landlord's not required to offer into evidence the notice, whether it's a non-payment notice or a notice to vacate that ended the tenancy. And so tenants don't know what's the reason for the eviction. Under this new change, starting July 1, to get a judgment, the landlord has to come to court with the notice and offer it into evidence and have the judge accept it into evidence and put it in the court file. And if that notice is not in the court file, that could be grounds to set aside the judgment of possession. Change number 3, the state pilot eviction diversion program. So, under current law, in a non-payment of rent case, the tenant's right to pay and stay ends on the court date. And if you don't pay in full everything you owe by the court date, then you get a judgment of possession on your record and it stays there for 10 years, and that's a barrier to renting in the future. Now, the pilot eviction program is different than the Richmond eviction diversion program that the City Council funded just this past Monday, $485,000. The 3 differences are this. The state pilot program will be a mandatory program. The Richmond program is voluntary. Second difference, the state pilot program has no financial assistance, unless the General Assembly changes its mind. The Richmond program will have financial assistance. And the third difference is the state pilot program will not start until July 1, 2020. But the Richmond program will start anytime we set the program up, hopefully in July or August of this year. How is the program going to work? Basically, the tenant has to qualify. The tenant has to meet these rules. Non-payment of rent is the only issue. The tenant has to come to court on the first court date, ask to be in the program, have to agree on the amount owed, and the tenant has to pay 25% of the amount owed as of that court date. The tenant has to meet these rules, testify why they fell behind, that they have money to pay the rent, and in the past 12 months they haven't been late more than 3 times in a 6-month, more than 3 times in a 12-month period, or more than twice in a 6-month period. So, and the tenant has not used the right to pay and stay in the past 6 months. It has not participated in a program like this in the last 12 months. So this program is not for everyone. It's not even for most tenants, but it is for the tenants who just had that one bad day, who fell off the knife's edge, who are back on their feet and just need some time and some assistance to catch up and be able to stay and avoid a judgment of possession. So there'd be a court-ordered payment plan, and basically the tenant pays the ongoing rent as it is due and pays the next 25% due the next month, the following 25% on the month after that, and the final 25% on the month after that. So 3 months down the road, they're current, case dismissed, no judgment of possession, nothing harming their record. And that's it. That's how the program is going to work when it comes in the state pilot program, but that has no financial assistance. That's how the program will work in Richmond once we set up the voluntary program, which starts in July or August. Change number 4, tenant attorney's fees in poor housing cases. We've already seen how code violations just overlap and match perfectly with high eviction rates. Well, under current law, landlords have lots of ways to get attorney's fees. They can get it through statute, they can get it through their lease. Tenants have very few ways to get attorney's fees. And so landlords do use the threat of attorney's fees to get leverage in litigation. I see it all the time. Starting July 1st, attorneys who represent tenants and win poor housing cases, poor housing conditions cases, can get attorney's fees in 2 different situations. Number 1 would be a tenant's assertion. And that's a case where the tenant sues the landlord because of poor housing conditions. To do that, the tenant has to be current in rent and stay current, have given written notice to the landlord, wait a reasonable time before filing the lawsuit, and then pay the next month's rent into court and file the court lawsuit called a tenant's assertion. If the tenant wins that lawsuit, the tenant's attorney can get attorney's fees under this new law starting July 1. By the way, let me add here, if you withhold your rent, that is going to be a surefire ticket to eviction under Virginia law. That's something we may want to try to change in the next General Assembly, but at the law right now, you withhold your rent, you're going to get evicted. There's no way to avoid that. The second type of case where you can get attorney's fees in poor housing conditions is you can use poor housing conditions as a defense to non-payment of rent. But you have to have done 2 things beforehand. 1, given your landlord prior written notice before the landlord filed the unlawful detainer eviction lawsuit. And if you are still in possession, if you're still there, you have to have paid into court the amount of rent due. So it's the same 2 conditions. Written notice, current in rent. I cannot say that often enough in poor housing conditions. Tenants have no right under Virginia law to raise poor housing conditions in court unless they've given written notice to the landlord and they are current in their rent. But if they win a defense on a case like this, under the law starting July 1, they can get attorney's fees. Number 5 is the extended right of redemption. This is like the most critical change in the law, and we're really trying to get the word out. I call it the extended right of redemption. As I mentioned earlier, under current law, the tenant's right to get caught up ends on the court date. There are actually 3 possible ways to pay and stay. The first would be within the grace period of the lease. You pay within the grace period, you get to stay. Second opportunity is after the grace period ends and before the landlord has filed an eviction lawsuit. If you pay the rent and the late fees during this time period, you get to stay. And these things I just mentioned, you can do any number of times. The third chance, under current law, as I mentioned, is once the landlord files that eviction lawsuit, you pay everything you owe on or before the first court date. We call this a redemption, which is to pay and stay, or a redemption tender, an offer to pay and stay. Redemption, means you pay everything you owe. All the rent, including a new month's rent, if that's become due, which always happens, all the late fees, and a new month's late fee if that becomes due, which almost always happens. The court cost, which many tenants aren't aware they have to pay, and reasonable attorney's fees if an attorney is involved. That's redemption. Redemption tender, under current law, you are getting help from a nonprofit or government agency, and you can't get the check from them by the first court date. They just can't cut the check that quickly. And so, if they will provide you with a letter, on their letterhead stationery, that says, we'll pay a certain amount of money, but we can't cut the check right now. You can come to court with that letter, and the judge has no choice but to postpone the case 10 more days. On the 10th day, you come back with all the money, and if so, you have done a redemption, case dismissed, paid. Now, under current law, you can do either of these things, the redemption or the redemption tender, only once in any 12-month period of time. The second time you try to do it, the landlord can accept all of your money and still go to court and get a judgment of what's called possession only. Now, starting July 1, not that far from now, the tenants will get a fourth and final opportunity to pay late and stay. So this is how it works. If the landlord wins in court, the landlord gets a judgment of possession. After that, the landlord can ask the court to issue what is called a writ of eviction. That's the paper that goes from the clerk to the sheriff to the tenant and says the exact day that the sheriff's going to come by and do the eviction. Typically it's done by lockout, changing the locks. And then the tenant has 24 more hours to contact the sheriff's office to get their stuff out. The extended right of redemption will mean that the tenant can pay everything that is owed as of 2 business days before the sheriff's scheduled eviction, which is vastly farther down the line than current law allows. Now, the payment has to be by certified funds, so cashier's check, certified check, or money order, and it means everything. Again, all the rent, including the new month's rent, all the late fees, including new month's late fees, the court cost, and the sheriff's fee to do the writ of eviction, and again, the reasonable attorney's fees if a landlord attorney is involved. And if so, the sheriff's eviction is canceled. Now, under the new law, the tenant can do any of these 3 things: the redemption tender, or the extended redemption, only once in any 12-month period of time. So people are going to have to be very strategic about which one of these they use and when. If a tenant can, in fact, pay everything by the court date, and they know they're going to be able to pay the next month's rent and the next month's rent, they should do a redemption, because that'll keep that judgment of eviction, that judgment of possession, off their record. On the other hand, if they maybe could scrape up enough money to do a redemption, they have no idea if they're going to be able to pay the next month's rent. They may be better off waiting and doing the extended right of redemption and do it the 2 business days before the sheriff comes to lock them out. So people have to be very strategic about which one of these they use during that 12-month period of time. 6th change in the law, we call it use writ or lose writ. I have to give a shout out to Helen Hardiman sitting back there, who came up with this catchy phrase. She's a fair housing attorney. Under current law, that judgment of possession is good for 12 full months. So even if the tenant pays and gets totally current, that judgment of possession is hanging over the tenant's head for 12 full months. And the landlord can evict at any time for any reason during that 12 full months. Starting July 1, the time is shortened to 6 months. So both the landlord and tenant have much greater certainty to know, is this tenant at risk of being evicted, or is this tenant in the clear? The other change, and I have to give a shout out to Patrick McLeod, who will be talking later, and this was proposed by the industry. Under the current law, that writ of eviction that is for whatever reason not executed by the sheriff, the parties work it out, or the landlord calls off the eviction or whatever, simply expires after 30 days. But the court records still show that the writ was issued. And that is a problem for the industry, because they don't know who actually got evicted by the sheriff and who didn't. So under this new law, if the writ of eviction is not executed and is simply returned to the clerk's office, the way we think this new law is supposed to work is that the the court record will be changed to show that writ was never issued in the first place. And that way the industry will know, just by looking at the court records, who actually got evicted by the sheriff and who didn't. So this was a change that they proposed we thought would benefit both sides. Final change, access to appeal. Under current law, well, I'm sorry, I have to do a law professor thing here. Under current law, we have an exception, we have the rule, the exception, and the exception to the exception. The rule is everybody has to pay an appeal bond to appeal from the general district court to the circuit court. The exception to the rule is that indigent people, low-income people, poor people, don't have to post an appeal bond to appeal from the general district court to the circuit court. The exception to the exception is even low-income people have to post an appeal bond in a non-payment of rent case. That's the current law. And the appeal bond is basically a total barrier to appealing under current law, because the appeal bond has to be not only the amount of the money judgment the landlord got into court, but also up to 12 months future rent. Usually it's 3 to 4 months, but it can be as high as 6, 8, 10, 12 months in advance, and that has to be done within 10 days of judgment. Nobody does that, and nobody appeals from general district court to circuit court in a non-payment of rent case. Under this new law, starting July 1, the appeal bond, the tenant still has to pay the judgment, the money judgment the landlord got, but also just has to pay their future rent as it becomes due, because that shows that the appeal bond matches the landlord's loss. Because what the landlord is doing is losing rent every month that the tenant continues to stay. So if the tenant pays the rent during every month the tenant continued to stay during the appeal, then the landlord is fully compensated. The current system, where you pay 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 months rent in advance in 10 days, has no relationship to the landlord's actual loss. And that's why the General Assembly changed that. So we hope to see more meritorious appeals of rent cases where the general district court judge simply got it wrong, and we want to get that corrected on appeal. I'm not going to go through all these tips to avoid eviction. They're on the copy of the PowerPoint that's back in the back of the auditorium here. But these are just sort of basic common sense guidelines that people need to follow if they want to avoid their being evicted. One thing I do want to mention, though, and back on this one, number 8, if the premises are sold or foreclosed upon, tenants do not have to move. Last year, in May of 2018, the Congress passed and the President signed a permanent extension of the Protecting Tenants at Foreclosure Act. This act had been in effect on and off and on and off since 2009, and now it's a permanent law. And what it says is if the property is foreclosed upon, the tenant gets to stay to the end of the lease or 90 days, whichever is longer. And that's a really important change, and it's now a permanent change. So get the word out that if the property is sold or the property is foreclosed upon, tenants do not have to vacate. The last thing I want to talk about, and I'm just about out of time, is where tenants can get help. There are civil legal aid programs. I've got a sheet about Central Virginia Legal Aid Society in the back. It tells you who we are, what we do, and how to get help. There is also an eviction legal help line, which you can see. It's a toll-free number, 833-NO-EVICT. If you just want to post a question online, there's virginia.freelegalanswers.org. You can also find free legal information at either our website, which is cvlas.org, or valegalAid.org. You can call the phone number and get legal information. You can go to the self-help website of the Virginia Judicial System, and there's even an app that you can text to that 703 number, or go to valawhelp2go.org. I'll be hanging around for the rest of the presentation. I'll be happy to talk to people and answer individual questions. Thank you so much.
We're going to entertain one second. We want to make sure everybody hear your question.
If you take your landlord to court
and you have text messages and emails, even those coming from the state, that proves your case, are they admissible in court?
Yes, they are admissible, but unless you get advanced written permission from the judge, you will not be able to bring this into the courthouse. That's a big, big access to justice due process problem. So print it out. That also can be tricky. I have no clue how to print something out off of this, but hopefully your smartphone provider can do that. I think it's a huge access to justice problem. I think it's a huge due process problem. The court system, there's an Access to Justice Commission that made a model policy that went to the Virginia Supreme Court in December of 2017. They sat on it for a full year, and then they finally said, yeah, we're going to implement the policy, but it's just a recommendation. The actual courthouse security is controlled by the local sheriffs, who are constitutional officers, and they decide who can bring these in, who can't. At least Richmond has liberalized its policy, so instead of making you hide it under the bushes, the way people had to, the sheriffs will hold it for you at the front desk. That is not universal. In Fairfax County, they have a policy of cell phones for all. All you got to do is have it silenced, the way everybody in this auditorium does. That should be statewide. That should be statewide. That should be state law.
You're going to hang around. She has a follow-up question, but you're going to hang around and answer that also. We have one here.
I just have a question regarding the foreclosure.
Yes, ma'am.
Because currently there are a lot of landlords that don't have the leases. So sometimes the tenant does not know when their lease is ended, and they'll serve them with an eviction notice. How does that work with number 8 to avoid the eviction?
Okay, so starting July 1, that's not going to be a problem. Because starting July 1, if there is no written lease, there's an oral, verbal, spoken, month-to-month lease, on or before July 1, the landlord has got to offer a written lease. If the landlord does not do that, this default lease automatically applies. And there will automatically be a 12-month lease that will start July 1 and will end June 30th of 2020. And if the landlord tries to evict, thinking the landlord has a month-to-month lease, the landlord is wrong, and that tenant needs to come to legal aid. Period, paragraph, end of story.
Hi. You talk a lot about rental, no payment, and eviction of no payment, but what about landlords who intimidate, slander, threaten all the time? I mean, constantly. Can we still come to you if we have problems like that as well?
Yeah, you certainly can come to legal aid about landlords who threaten, intimidate, etc. But still, it doesn't give the tenant a reason not to pay the rent in full and on time every month, and it doesn't give the tenant the right to not follow the lease. That is required. So what we would do is certainly, write a demand letter to the landlord and say, this is what's happening, stop doing it. I mean, I'll give you an example. Landlord access. There are rules in the law that apply to landlord access. Basically, it says the landlord may not enter without the consent of the tenant. But it also says the tenant cannot unreasonably withhold consent unless it is an emergency. And landlords abuse the emergency exception all the time. And then the law also says that the landlord has to give advance notice, and unless it's impractical to do so, the landlord has to give at least 24 hours notice. So we would write a demand letter to the landlord saying, stop doing this. Does the law provide a specific legal remedy if the landlord does not stop doing that? No, it doesn't. But we would hope that at some point the General Assembly would adopt such a specific remedy for the landlord not following the statute. In the meantime, though, it is critical for tenants to document everything. Get a notebook, write it down, date, time, and place, name, address, phone, who, what, when, where, why, and how. Pretend you're writing a newspaper story. That will be fantastically useful to a legal aid attorney or any attorney you go to. Document, document, document. All right, I'll be.
And we know that I've acknowledged that we've seen some other hands up. We are going to be taking questions during our panel also, so just note it down on your program so you don't forget it. One of the things before we move on is I want to kind of break down some of the things that Martin talked about in layman terms, because we find that the reason why a lot of tenants get in trouble and hemmed up is that they don't understand the language and they don't understand what's going on. And that's why we started teaching tenant right classes for those that are in public housing, Code of Federal Regulations, for those that are renters in dwellings that have 100 and more properties, like Mr. Parsons, the Virginia Residential Tenant Act. And I always tell people that the Virginia Residential Tenant Act is your Bible. It tells you everything of what you can and cannot do, and it tells your landlord what they can and they cannot do, and what is your recourse if they violate that. The other thing about it is that people have to stop express moving. Okay, I've been a property manager for 36 years, and I promise you, no one reads their lease agreement except for 2 times. One, if you want to see if I can do what I say I'm going to do, or 2, you looking for a way to get out of it. No one reads a lease agreement. I guarantee you that some of you in here don't even know where your lease agreement is. And the reason why I say that, because a lot of times when calls come to our office and I ask people to bring me their lease agreement and they don't have one. And then I gotta try to go through the back door. If it's a property management company, it's pretty standard. If it's the housing authority, it's pretty standard. But then for individual landlords, it's really, really difficult. Okay, so I always tell people, invest in yourself first. Get yourself a file cabinet or a folder and put those important documents in. For me, I approach life like I might end up in court. So everything has a file if I need to pull it. So just explaining, okay, for those of you that are renters, the language gets us in trouble. First of all, the 5-day notice. The 5-day notice is just a notice from the landlord reminding you, hey, I haven't received my money. You have 5 days from the date of this notice to respond. That's all a 5-day notice is. So you don't have to do a mass exodus and start packing up and moving because people go, oh, I got an eviction notice. You did not get an eviction notice. You got a reminder that you have defaulted on something. The warrant in debt, an unlawful detainer. An unlawful detainer is not an eviction notice. An unlawful detainer is an intimidation notice because now I have to get your attention. So the sheriff comes out, he puts it on your door, and again, people start packing up and moving. All an unlawful detainer says is, hey, I need your attention and you haven't been paying attention. We need to go before the judge and understand what's going on. That's all an unlawful detainer is in layman terms, okay? The only person that can evict you is the sheriff. A landlord can't change your locks. They can't diminish service. They can't not do work orders. The only person that can evict you is the sheriff. We're gonna talk later on because we know that Richmond hit the newspaper about being high on evictions, but in reality, those numbers are skewed because there's no data to account for what were actual evictions. All they are court watchers that went to court and looked at the docket and seen how many people were on the docket. There's no resource to go back and retrieve exactly how many of those actually ended in eviction. And those are things that our legislatures and our attorneys and VAMA, we're trying to work on to get realistic numbers, okay? The eviction diversion program is a start, but it is not the whole answer. Once you get a writ of eviction, you still do not have to pack up and move. You need to communicate with your landlord, okay? Can I make a payment arrangement with you? Will you accept my rent payment, okay? Not communicating is what causes the sheriff to come out, because if they don't hear from you, you need to go to court. Do not get intimidated and not go to court. Currently, Martin just told you some great laws, but right now, if you go to court, you get 10 extra days to resolve your issue with the landlord. If you don't go to court, we get immediate judgment of possession because they figure you don't care, we don't care. Some people go before court and the landlord still gets judgment, and you know that you're 100% right, like he told you. You have a right to appeal, and if you can provide evidence that something is wrong, you have a motion to rehear. So there are all kind of recourses that are out there for you that you should talk to Martin about. But again, the only person that can evict you is the sheriff. The next thing that I want to talk about is something that's near and dear to my heart: predatory renting. Okay, and I know no one has heard of that term because I just made it up. But predatory renting has taken Richmond by storm. You guys know it as slumlords. Okay, I'm from New York City. I come from a city that was infamous for slumlords. If anybody remember, I'm gonna tell my age. There was a movie called The Landlord with Joe Pesci where he had to live in his property. That is not a comedy, that is a true story. That is a true story of a landlord that his properties was so bad and he kept getting away with it until the judge sentenced him to live in his own properties for a year without any assistance from his family. The NAACP Richmond has formed an anti-slumlord task force.
Yeah.
Because there is an alarming number of slumlords in Richmond, Virginia, who have a blatant disregard for the Landlord-Tenant Act, the Code of Federal Regulations, and the Uniform Standards of Physical Occupancy. The staff at Code Enforcement is limited to what action can and cannot be taken against these predators. That, compounded by the lack of true affordable housing and the lack of good landlords working with those who have past blemishes on their credit and criminal reports, has festered this to get out of control. Our citizens have to live under the worst conditions: pest infestation, lack of repair and upkeep, and even raw sewage. Yet in every instance, the landlord benefits by collecting rent. Further, when confronted with these, the individuals retaliate by diminishing service or issue threats of eviction, leaving our citizens without recourse. Our task force is working with legislators to have firmer legislation to be written to combat slumlords in the city of Richmond and the surrounding counties. This would empower code enforcement and courts to levy violations and hefty fines to neglectful property owners that don't respond adequately. Forcing residents to live in substandard housing and endure broken heat, pests, and other threats to health and safety, all while the landlord continues to collect rent and make a profit, is unacceptable and should hold some form of criminal accountability. This is a violation of the basic human right of housing. Repeat violators' business licenses should be suspended until violations are remedied, and if habitable infractions exist, their license should be revoked. Reinstatement should require a probationary period and random inspections. The Attorney General and the judicial system should aggressively pursue those that violate this human right. We also need to require more transparency in actual ownership versus management of properties. And this is really important because one of the situations that I recently dealt with was the residents of Hawthorne Hall and the flats. And it took us 6 months to find out who actually owned that property. And the reason being is because these landlords set up shell companies in Delaware as LLCs, and they named them LLC 1, LLC 2, LLC 3, 4, and 5. And so what happens is as soon as we go after LLC 1, right, Delegate, they roll it over into LLC 2. And I actually talked to the owner who told me, what you gonna do to me? I'm not coming back to Virginia. There's nothing that you can do. And he was 100% right. He was 100% right. So we had to go the back door and take his properties from him and force him into receivership where he had to sell them. Wow. Okay? And so that's why when you see the Bloom Apartments, I tell you, it's a brand new sheriff in town. Yeah. Okay? When you see the Bloom Apartments, that is not the owners who own Hawthorne Hall. We actually went to court and with code enforcement and had a judge capture all of his properties and force them into auction, okay? There's a young lady here that's a client of mine, and she allowed me to speak for her. But I'm gonna pass these pictures around when I talk about slumlords, so you can just get an idea. For somebody to live in a house and be paying $1,100 a month, you would think that this house will be phenomenal. So I should not get a call that her wife fell through the floor trying to get in the bathtub. Or I go there and raw sewage is running over the house because the sewage line had been disconnected for 15 years. And the sewer gases is going through the house. This is serious. So we're asking you to consider joining our task force, because we are not playing with slumlords. There are a lot of them out there. Dean Parsons, we're coming for you. Mr. Zing, we're coming for you. Mr. Robinson, we're coming for you. Okay? I promise you, if you go to the NAACP housing website, we have a list of landlords not to rent from. Okay? We're no longer playing. No one should have to live in substandard housing. No one should have to live without heat. That is a human right. Okay, the Constitution says life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And I know if you're anything like I am, when I get off from a day of work, what do I want to do? I want to go home and I want to relax. I don't want to go home and have to check out of one problem into another. My home's supposed to be my sanctuary. Okay, so as you look at these pictures, just remember when President Minor and Delegate McQueen said, we need help. We need help. So at this time, I'm going to start our program, and I'm going to ask our panel to go ahead and to come and take the stage while I talk about the 7 principles of human rights, and then I'll introduce you all. So for everybody that's on the panel, what is the human right to housing? Everyone has a fundamental human right to housing, which ensures access to safe, secure, habitable, and affordable home with freedom from forced eviction. It is the government's obligation to guarantee that everyone can exercise this right to live in security, peace, and dignity. This right must be provided to all persons irrespective of income or access to economic resources. There are 7 principles that are fundamental to the right of housing in the United States. Security of tenure. Residents should possess a degree of security. Protection against forced evictions, harassments, threats, and predatory redevelopment and displacement. Availability of services, materials, facilities, and infrastructure. Housing must provide certain facilities essential to health, security, comfort, and nutrition. For instance, residents need access to safe drinking water, heat, lights, facilities to wash clothing, food and storage, and sanitation. Affordability, true affordability. Housing costs should be at such a level that the attainment and satisfaction of this basic need is not threatened or compromised. And that's number 3, and I'm going to pinpoint there for a minute. One of our panelists, Michelle Mosby, and I attended another symposium the other day, and they were saying where the average income, the average household income is $30,000 a year in the city of Richmond. Okay? People cannot afford to live off of $30,000 a year, because how many of you think about this? We are all one paycheck away from poverty. All it takes is a death, an illness, something serious. For some of us, all it takes is our car to break down, and we'll be sitting in that car cursing like a sailor, because we know that that is going to cause us a major disruption. So now imagine people who are living 30% below the minimum standard. Affordability, habitability, safe and decent housing. It should provide residents adequate space from cold, damp, heat, rain, wind, threats to health and safety, structural hazards, and disease. Accessibility. It should be accessible to all, and disadvantaged and vulnerable groups must have full access. One of the most heartbreaking stories that me and Michelle heard at that was a senior citizen that had lived in her house for 62 years was being evicted out of her house because she could no longer afford it on a fixed income because her husband passed away. and sitting at a table with legislators and advocates, and nobody could come up with what can be done to save this woman's house. All that lady wants to do is die in the house that her and her husband acquired. And the likelihood that that will happen will not exist because we have nothing in safety nets for our seniors. That when their income or retirement and Social Security comes along, it's not enough to stretch. The industry celebrates the COLA when they get a 2.8% increase. Woohoo! I remember, I won't tell my age, I remember back in the day when our seniors was eating cat food.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I remember that. And so unfortunately, we're starting to get back there again if we don't protect our vulnerable. Location. Housing should not be built on polluted sites or immediate proximity to pollution sources. Sounds familiar. The right to health for residents and physical safety, good schools, health facilities, supermarkets. Housing and housing policies must guarantee the expression of cultural identity and diversity, including the preservation of cultural landmarks for all. Redevelopment or modernization programs must ensure that the cultural significance of housing and communities are not sacrificed. So with that being said, we're going to start our panel discussion. We're going to have free flow discussion. It's not scripted. We will take questions. If you have a question, just raise your hand. I'm going to introduce my esteemed panel of leaders in the community. So I want to introduce to you Ms. Kelly Evans. And Kelly is an experienced housing professional with over 10 years of experience. She has worked for RRHA. She has worked for various housing. And now she works for Anthem Help Keepers as a long-term supportive services outreach specialist. And when we get to her, we'll find out what all of that means. We've heard from Martin Wegbrecht, who is the Director of Litigation at the Central Virginia Legal Aid Society. My newfound brother from another, Mr. Damon Duncan. He is the new CEO of the Richmond Redevelopment and Housing Authority. He has over 26 years of experience in public housing and Section 8 operations and grant writing. He has a wealth of knowledge, and he's going to be sharing some information when we start talking about Project Fail. My sister, Michelle Mosby. Okay, she is the first African-American woman to serve as the body president of Richmond City Council. She is the executive director and founder of the Help Me Help You Foundation. It's a nonprofit that works towards reintegrating formerly incarcerated citizens. We have Mr. Patrick McLeod, another brother of mine from the industry. He is the chief executive officer from the Virginia Apartment Management Association, which is better known as VAMA. And then we have Elaine Summerfield. She is the executive director of Richmond Opportunities, Inc., where she oversees the day-to-day operation of the organization's ability to deliver its mission to provide holistic support to all of Richmond public housing residents. So we have a great panel. Please welcome them. And so, with that being said, I'm going to throw out some topics, guys, and I want to talk about in great detail if anybody has any questions. The first thing is, everybody we know has a fundamental human right to housing. How do we truthfully address systematic barriers that contribute to housing instability so we can honestly begin addressing housing inequities in our communities? And I'm going to start with Kelly.
Good morning. Yes, it's on. Good morning. Can you repeat the question again? Because I'm just thinking about the dynamics of how to fully answer that.
How do we truthfully, keyword truthfully, address systematic barriers that contribute to housing instability so we can honestly begin addressing housing inequities in our communities?
Thank you for repeating that. When I think about housing inequities, I think about the dynamics of it not just being my for and no more. How do we advocate on behalf of others who may be having an issue with what's going on where they're living? And I think about when I used to work for RRHA, I thought about, at first I was like, oh, I'm the senior office support specialist. Let me figure out how I can address you paying your rent. Then I started realizing, no, how can I help you address you earning more income and you moving out of public housing? I saw it as a starting point, but it wasn't meant for you to live here for the rest of your life and leave a legacy for your family through public housing. And so I began to start helping to equip people to understand you have to learn how to speak up for yourself, advocate for yourself, and then journey along with others. So when I worked for the Office of Community Wealth Building, I was the housing advocate supervisor. I talked about how to become being a good neighbor. So no matter where you lived, you should already know that you're a good neighbor. So my next door neighbor I get a job and the next door neighbor can keep my kids. And so we work together in maybe a bartering system to figure out how to be a good neighbor and help both of us on both ends. So as we become educated within the process, we become advocates, not just for ourselves, but for the community. And so as we begin to learn the language of city council, as we begin to learn the language of the General Assembly, policies have to be changed as it relates to those of the lower socioeconomic status. And within my current role, I travel the entire state of Virginia, and there are not any laws that speak to the level of lower socioeconomic status. And we all service the same group of vulnerable populations, but is everybody speaking the same language? And so as we become educated on the ground, more so grassroots, working alongside with Virginia Legal Aid, anytime I have a member that's referred to me, I definitely send them to legal aid, because people have to be educated in knowing their rights, knowing what they're responsible for. However, you got to know what you're responsible for as the tenant also.
Absolutely.
And so as we continue to educate and become educated and become even more knowledgeable, I'm not saying you have to be an attorney, but as you become knowledgeable, you're able to share that free knowledge, because this information is free. Everything Martin has told us about, everything Tracy, each and every person on this panel, all of you all are a wealth of free information that has to be shared. And so as we come together, I think about one band and one voice, we can make an impact how housing looks in the state of Virginia and in the city of Richmond. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly. Patrick?
Wow, you started out with a big question. I think about it more from a policy perspective. You know, we're dealing with a variety of issues, and I have a couple things that kind of always are kind of my ground rules to operate off of when trying to figure out how to solve any of the problems, whether they're housing, policy-related issues. And I think we often get pulled in the wrong directions on really looking at these issues. I have two basic rules, is that people always make value-based decisions. Those are oftentimes financially, but they are value decisions. I don't care whether you're a business, whether you're an individual, it is a value-based decision. The second one is that people tend to follow the path of least resistance. I think those two work together. And I find that our policymakers far too often, whether it's the General Assembly, whether it's Congress, start to write laws based on the way they believe people should behave as opposed to the way people really behave. And I think that's one of the things that we have to start operating in the realistic world about why people make the decisions they make as opposed to living in one of how we believe you should decide. I think that leads us in the wrong direction, leads us talking about the wrong issues. I don't know that I have any good answers on this other than that's just the context that when I talk about a lot of things, that's the context I tend to look at things in.
Absolutely. Elaine?
Thanks. I agree that's a helpful context to have, and it's related to what I was thinking about in terms of how we view housing as a human right. This symposium is framed in that belief. However, not everybody agrees that. Not all of our policymakers see things in that light. And if we can reframe how we look at housing to be truly a right, right now in our society it is seen as something that you work hard, and if you work hard enough you get what you deserve. And if you work hard enough you'll deserve a decent place to live. Well, we all know that's not how it works out. And so if we could reframe it a little bit so that housing is where it's a starting point. We started you're from Anthem, right? And so we've started some of that work when it comes to healthcare, looking and starting, although not fully, agreeing that healthcare is a right, but it's the same goes for housing. And if we could start thinking about things with the same language, that's a starting point, that we're starting with this belief, then I think we can start to move some of the policies that need to change.
Agree, Michelle? It's fine.
Because
I know.
I have to figure out how to temper how I say things.
We started this meeting saying this was real conversation.
Okay, so housing for me, first is an accountability place. I believe that the start is truly making all persons to be accountable. Delegate McQuinn in her speech talked a lot today about so many things, but they are prevalent as to why we're here. When we look at our local population, we look at our seniors, and we were at an event, and I was sitting at a table with some great organizations. However, the heading of those organizations are white people. And I just need to say what needs to be said. They were white people, and they were purchasing properties all throughout our city. And in this particular moment in time, we're having a conversation about 4 people about to not have a place to live. 2 of those persons was 80 years old, and 2 were 90. And I'm sitting at a table with, once again, some prevalent organizations that do a lot in our city. And I'm saying, how are we having a conversation about an eviction instead of a conversation that says, how do we all come together and fix this property so they have somewhere to live? And the fact that we sat there and we really didn't get there. Me and another black young lady with some braids, she was saying herself, I don't get it. How are we having a conversation that says that they're possibly going to be evicted when we're sitting here? And I'm saying, okay, I might not have my organization that's as strong as yours, but I got some people that can lay some wood. I got some people that can paint. How can we come together to ensure that we are making sure these seniors that are 80 and 90 are not put on the street? I left, and I'm trying to tell you, me and Tracy, I was livid, because my mother turned 77 yesterday. My dad is 80. So if I wasn't here, somebody would be letting my parents be sitting on the street while we determine how to wait till you get evicted, then I come flip your house, and then I rent it to whomever I want to rent it to at cost because you're not paying what I would want to charge. That's a problem. And so housing is a problem because, once again, I believe that our black folk haven't stood to the test. We haven't gotten together. We haven't pooled our resources so that we can indeed take care of our people. Nobody's going to take care of our people, y'all. I'm trying to tell you, nobody's going to take care of our people. I might not get to talk ever again, but I'm trying to tell you that we have enough folk in this city, our own people, that will indeed look out for my mother, look out for Delegate McQuinn. It is time for us to see housing as it is. I sat on city council and I used to get irritated because I would look at those persons that would tell me how they're going to raise our kids. You can't tell me how to raise our kids because you don't know how to raise my kids. You would tell me how to fix housing for my people. You don't know the struggle of my people, so you're not even going to get trusted enough to get that information to help our people. I'm saying at this symposium, black folk wake up. And it is time for us to pool together and fix the situations that are going on in this city so that we are not put out. At that same event, it said that, let me get it because I had to take a picture because I was distraught at the numbers that day that I saw. It says there are 3,600 fewer black homeowners in the city now than in 2000. Something is wrong with that because Church Hill is different. When I lived in Church Hill looked like me. Today, Church Hill no longer looks like me. The homeowners have changed because we are sitting back. There is no start. We need to be jumping at 1,000 and making something happen. We got enough developers. We got enough people with dollars to make some sense. And I'm saying the change is going to start with us. Whether we believe it or not, the change starts with you all. Me, you. And it's time to make something, housing changes happen for our people.
Thanks, Michelle.
I'm sorry, Tracy.
No, you're fine. We needed to get that out. That's good stuff. David?
She done had that bottled up for some time.
Since the other day, I want to tell you.
Bless your heart for that. Can you go through the question one more
Absolutely.
time?
How do we truthfully address systemic barriers that contribute to housing instability so we can honestly begin addressing housing inequities in our communities?
Okay, I thought I heard it right the first time, but the key term that I focused on in there is systemic barriers. And what that means to me is systematically, and the gentleman did a great job of showing us the redlining and the historical nature of the redlining and how it brought us to where we are today. But my specific viewpoint is that of a housing authority leader, a career in housing authority business, I mean straight out of college. So I know all too well about particularly poor people, and in most cases, African American people being concentrated in certain areas, right next to the railroads, right next to the sewer treatment plant, and on and on and on. But I will say the difference that we can make to affect the system, and it's been articulated already, is to affect things at the policy level. Well, how do you affect things at the policy level? Your leadership has to affect things at the policy level. Your elected officials, the person that you hire as your CEOs for the various nonprofits and housing authorities have the ability to affect things at the policy level. I'm a member of a couple of affordable housing, public housing organizations. One of them, most importantly, is the Housing Committee, and we draft white papers that go to Congress and make recommendations for ultimate policy that's passed down. I also serve on the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Task Force, a national task force, to make sure that all voices are heard, particularly minority voices are heard, as it relates to policy making. So, in my viewpoint, systemic issues that create barriers definitely need to be addressed at the policy level. So when we go and elect our officials to represent us locally, regionally, and nationally, it needs to be someone with an agenda in mind to get down and dirty within the policy and create measures that create an equal playing field.
Absolutely, thank you. Maureen.
Thank you, Tracy. So I have a 3-word answer to the question, but I'm not going to say just 3 words. But the 3 words are more affordable housing. And by affordable housing, I'm talking about for everybody. People at 80% of area median income, at 50% of area median income, at 30% of area median income. And by affordable, I mean you're paying no more than 30% of your income for rent. Now, Matthew Desmond, who wrote the book Evicted, for which he got the Pulitzer Prize in 2017, pointed out that of all people in the country who are eligible for federally subsidized housing and will be paying only 30% of their income for rent, only 1 in 5 gets it. Now, if only 1 out of 5 people who went to a food pantry came away with food, or if only 1 in 5 people who went to the emergency room for medical care got medical care, we would be appalled. We would not tolerate that. And yet we tolerate that every day for housing. The other thing that Matthew Desmond points out is that we need a universal housing program for everyone. We have a universal housing program in this country. We have for years. It just doesn't include low-income people. The universal housing program we have in this country is for middle-class people. It's called the mortgage interest deduction. Everybody who buys a home gets the mortgage interest deduction. But that's for middle-class people. Not everybody who's in need of housing, those 4 out of 5, gets it. And that's a big problem at the national level, and that's going to take a lot of time to solve. But more locally, there are things that we can do and are beginning to do. 4 years ago, Richmond, after 4 years of agitating by Richmonders involved to strengthen our community, adopted and funded an affordable housing trust fund of $1 million a year. I'm on the Affordable Housing Trust Fund Advisory Board. And just this year, just this budget season, Mayor Stoney proposed and got through City Council an increase from $1 million a year to $2.9 million a year. That sounds like a lot of money, but Washington, D.C., which is larger than Richmond, but in the same ballpark, has an affordable housing trust fund of $100 million a year. So we are a long, long, long way in Richmond from really having an adequately funded affordable housing trust fund. And even though the budget passed unanimously this past Monday, in the council deliberations to increase the affordable housing trust fund from $1 million a year to $2.9 million a year, that survived by a single vote. That was a 5-4 vote. 4 city council members, I could name names, but I'm not going to, did not support, ultimately they supported the budget, but they did not support an increase of $1 million to $2.9 million. And some of those council people were in the districts in Richmond that have some of the highest eviction rates. Wow. That's also unacceptable. So getting the Affordable Housing Trust Fund up to $5 million a year, $10 million a year, as Councilwoman Robertson has been advocating for years, would be a big step forward.
Wow. Thank you, Martin. And so at this time, we're going to have a question by Delegate McQuinn. I'm going to let her ask the question. We want 1 minute answers and responses.
You ready?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, and Duncan, maybe, Mr. Duncan, Mr. Duncan?
Yes.
Okay, maybe you could answer for me. I, over the years, have been very concerned about subsidized housing as it relates to retirement communities where senior citizens are living. You have many of them who are living in these areas, and they are, in late years of their life. They move there, I guess, expecting that this is going to be the place, my last stop, that my quality of life will be wonderful here. I'll be able to be joined with other seniors who live there. And then, all of a sudden, many of these areas that it began to have people who are also disabled move into those various communities, which has created some problems. Because many of them who are disabled because the lifestyle has been probably not one that most of us would choose, but however, they have had to deal with certain issues and challenges in their life, and so they're disabled, qualified to be disabled. They move into many of these senior citizen places, and then the lifestyle that they're in, disabled because of, continues. You understand what I'm saying? Without saying all that I need to say. Someone looking at me like, I'm strange. So the same selling drugs on the outside, now they're disabled. They come into the senior citizen places and they're still selling drugs. And seniors are many of them have come to me and said they are fearful about it, they're concerned about it, and I have tried my best to address it. And I can't because of the federal government said that those who are disabled, qualify for those properties, to have a home and space in those various places. What do we do under those circumstances?
That what you're speaking of has been the plague of particularly public housing for at least the last 30 years. There is something that can be done, which is something that we've done at the place that I came from, is we petitioned HUD and we went through some administrative processes to in fact designate elderly housing as in fact elderly housing, and take away the disabled distinction.
Okay.
The problem comes in, okay, well, what do you do with the disabled population that still qualify for assistance? And if you have a nearby, a neighboring nonprofit or someone else that can start to take those individuals in, it's not a huge deal. But when you got the number of properties that we have here in Richmond, it can create a tremendous problem. I mean, I don't know, I'm sure there's some landlords in here, I don't know who will take hundreds of disabled based on your definition of disabled, and she was being eloquently about it. It's you know, some young people mixed with elderly, and you know, I've recently lost parents, and I always wanted to build a residential facility that I would be proud to have my parents reside in. I would not be happy to have my parents reside next door to someone that's 30 years old, recovering drug addict, and they're selling drugs themselves, or they're running numbers, or they're doing, you know, whatever the latest thing is. But that continues to be a challenge, particularly because the population is so big, and then it becomes a matter of, okay, well, where do these people go? Once you go through the administrative hoops of creating an elderly designated facility, then where do the balance of the people go? That is a challenge. Then you get into fair housing challenges and equal rights and equal housing opportunities, and it just becomes layered after that. But it is something that can be done on a property by property basis.
Thank you, Damon. Patrick, I'm gonna let you jump in on that because that's the area that you also...
Yeah, if you saw my face, I was a little puzzled by the question, because under the Fair Housing Act, disability is a protected class, but there's a distinction that needs to be made.
Right.
Using drugs is not a disability. Being a recovering addict is a disability. So I think just for clarification in the room, that needs to be handled. And then obviously we have it in Fair Housing Act.
Absolutely.
And it's not just listen, I am so supportive of those who are recovering addicts, pushing for, you know, it to be addressed in many ways. That's not the problem. Not that even that you're a recovering addict, or even if you're using drugs right now. The problem is when drugs is being sold out of these facilities by those who reside in the facility and they're not senior citizens. Okay? And then so there's a fear that exists among the senior citizens because they're dealing with, you know, people in and out, in and out, in and out. And even property owners, spoke with them about it. And they seem to it appears that their hands are tied as well.
I'm gonna go, Patrick, I'm gonna come back to you. Martin, give me a minute. I'm gonna come back to Patrick, and then I have a statement of what I've done myself.
Okay.
Okay. So I looked it up on my phone under the HUD regulation, and it says, the definition of person with a disability does not include current users of illegal controlled substances, but does provide protections for individuals with drug or alcohol addiction. So I agree 100% with Patrick. If they're in treatment, they're under a disability, they're entitled to fair housing protection. If they're not in treatment, then they don't meet the definition of a person with a disability. So the landlord can offer a clear choice to folks in that situation. Get treatment, enter a program, you get protection. If you won't enter a treatment, enter a program, you're not protected. I can start unlawful detainer eviction proceedings against you. It's pretty much that straightforward.
Right. I'm gonna come too because you guys kind of danced all around that thing. But this is the reality of the thing. The reality of the thing is that you need strong property management. Okay, because I run an affordable tax credit property like an A property. I get doctors and lawyers that come to my property and get disappointed because they can't live there. And the reason why is because I'm involved. First day I went to the drug boys and told them, I respect your entrepreneurial spirit, you just can't do it here. Okay? And I have no problem with working out a relationship with police officers. But this also comes to tenant accountability and neighbor accountability. Now, it's a little different when you're dealing with seniors. But one thing that I adopted on my apartment community that Martin and I didn't cover is what your addendums say. And I have an addendum of 0 tolerance. I promise you it does. It says 0 tolerance. I have a 0 tolerance policy. And under that 0 tolerance policy, it outlines everything. Now, Delegate was real nice, but I'm gonna take it somewhere else with seniors, because I've been on senior properties where my seniors have about 25 nieces that like popping up every time the first Tuesday and Wednesday of Social Security Day.
Yes.
Okay, and so when you come to my apartment building and you don't know your uncle's name, you can't come into my apartment building, and I ban you from my property. And then I have a conversation with their uncle, because I've actually managed a property over on Bainbridge where a senior gave me a hard time about his niece until she set him up with her boyfriend and they robbed him and almost beat him to death. Okay, so that goes into the management, that goes into security, and it goes into knowing tenant rights. Knowing what you're accountable for, but the problem is that tenants don't want to get involved. Most of you go, not my baby, not my problem. If it doesn't happen in your household, if it doesn't affect you, when you live in a neighborhood, like Michelle said, we got to become part of a community. We can't let everybody fix our problems, and our seniors are our greatest asset.
Yeah.
I promise you, if my 77-year-old mother called me that she had a problem, me, my brothers, and my sisters, we rolling deep.
Yeah.
And that's the way that we got to get back. Now, this is no offense to all of our Caucasian brothers and sisters, but in our village, we don't disrespect our seniors.
That's right. That's right.
Okay? If you put out the call of action that somebody's mother is in crises, we got you. And we've got to get back to that village mentality instead of letting people dictate, not my baby, not my problem. And so, Delegate McQuinn, sometimes, just sometimes, and I know, Patrick, you're going to hate me for this at Martin, but sometimes we have to go a little bit against the grain of what policy says and what morality says, and what's right. Mr. Bradley?
Thank you. I really appreciate this conversation. My question is piggybacking off of the delegate. I think she's opened the doors for a lot of things. Going back to the code, Sister Michelle hit on the passion, Brother Duncan hit the reference to the federal code. For me, as they do know, when my sister Tracy speaks of how she's speaking, she hit it on the head. Reverend Quinn, it was all about security, it was all about the landlords, making sure that those things happen, first and foremost. We have to define, though, when we say affordable housing, and I get to my question, affordable housing, for who? You see, now we're going to deal with HUD, right? We deal with who HUD defines as low income, housing residents, Section 8 vouchers. When we deal with those residents that might not have a lease, we're dealing with maybe those that are low income, but are not on Section 8 or live in housing development. So they get the housing the best that they can. But they're still under the umbrella of HUD in subsidizing and assistance. So once we know that, then we say, who sets the rent? HUD sets the rent. And let's be real. We got affordable housing with HUD and already set the rent. If it's a 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom, 4-bedroom. So that's standardized across the nation. And let's put that over here. So we know it's affordable. And HUD then defines that applicant's qualifications to be able to meet those for whether it's a 3-bedroom, 4-bedroom based on their family situation. So federal government and system equipment, they got stuff in place, we're in place, but it is educating. So once we know that that's where we're at and we know who we're dealing with, then we do get to the enforcement of those codes that provide those opportunities for the preference community.
Thank you.
That's what we do.
I think your statement is valid, and I'm going to go to Stephen, make it 1 minute, and we want to go. But in response to what you were saying, sir, think about this, okay? We can't even get our people to show up to a PTA meeting. Let's tell the truth, shame the devil. And I know that how many times you yourself have had tenant right classes, and I do them, and I don't consider it robbery, 1 to 1,000, whoever shows up, okay? We have got to keep pressing people, but as advocates, we've also got to be working together and not saying different things, because the people are perishing because they're confused. Okay? Because some people advocate out of fear. Some people just like to keep some stuff riled up to make themselves relevant.
Slacktivists.
Exactly. So we've got to hold our advocates, and if you're going to tell it, let's tell it, just like how you do, accountability. Okay? And all of this stuff is on HUD's website, and HUD is downtown Richmond. I don't understand why everybody think that HUD is in Washington, D.C. HUD is at 600 West Broad Street. That is where your regional office is.
They're useless.
Okay? They're useless because we allow them to be useless. Because we focus on elections for the White House. We don't focus on local elections. We don't go to PTA meetings. We don't go to city council meetings. We don't go to these things until we want something, or we don't like something that they're doing. We've got to get better. People treat you the way you allow them to treat you. And when we talk about public housing, you get treated the way you allow yourself to be treated. And you're accountable for some of the things that you do. Stephen?
Blessings for the opportunity. I have two quick things to answer your question. One of the things that we can do to help resolve the issue is work on with the different corporations and jobs near these housing opportunities, because it doesn't, you've seen the rates where people are spending 30 to 45, in some cases an hour to get to the job, which is making the housing and ability to get to work back and forth even higher. So we also need to address the issues with these corporations. Another thing we need to go against these tenants and landlords is go after the grants and the loans that they are applying for to get the money to get these properties, because they have rules and restrictions. And if they're not following it, it's our due diligence to go back and find out what's going on. And also the different boards and governing bodies in DC that's provided the grants for approval for them to apply. But another question that I wanted to ask the panel is what to do about those who have criminal records, who have passed their time out of jail, who are still struggling.
Table that question because it is on our agenda.
Sorry.
Okay, so table that. Okay, so the next thing that I want to talk about is gentrification. Okay, because there even seems to be some misinterpretation on exactly what that is. So I'm going to go to you, Elaine, first, and then I'm going to go to Kelly. Please keep your answer to 1 minute. I'm a time, y'all.
Yes, ma'am.
First of all, what I want to share is that I'm here. Tracy invited me through my role with Richmond Opportunities, Inc. But these are my personal opinions. They don't reflect those of my board, so I just wanted to put that out there. So gentrification, I moved here now about close to 18 years ago. And I came from the West Coast. Sometimes people say, why would you move here from Portland? Well, why I moved here from Portland was I saw this as a community with a lot of opportunity. And it's a community at that time that was affordable. Like I could actually consider purchasing a home. I could consider making a life for myself, even though I, wanted to work in the social sector, nonprofit sector. And you couldn't do that in Portland. Now, I also, at this point in time, have heard myself saying, Richmond right now reminds me of Portland 20 years ago. And what was going on then, it was the start of an affordable housing crisis. And that's what's happening now in Richmond. That's what I see happening in neighborhoods close to where I live, where wages are stagnant, especially for those on fixed incomes and our seniors, but the housing prices are, if you're renting, I mean, they are just unaffordable. So what can we do about that? I think there can be some policies put into place at the local level related to inclusionary zoning so that we insist and require developers provide affordable housing units in the community. It needs to happen now. I mean, we missed out on so many opportunities to do this, over the past few years with the new apartments that have been built, but let's get on it now because it really is a crisis. We need places for people to live because I mean, I moved to Richmond because it was an attractive and vibrant community.
That's
and I wanted to
time-related.
stay that way. So
Thank you. Kelly?
So, being born and raised 48 years here in Richmond, Virginia, never thought I would be in a place of looking at saying the south side looked different, the east side looked different, the north side looked different. My dad used to take us to Church Hill and we would go eat barbecue from the place off near Carolina Barbecue. We would go ride our bikes. We would go and look, and we lived in a house. My parents are still married to this day and retired. And I never thought the face of Richmond would look so different.
Amen.
And so the dynamics of what's going on now, and I know we talked about redlining and we look at gentrification, but in my opinion, I feel like gentrification is a newer word for redlining because the dynamics of what's happening is people are being forced out of a place that they've lived forever and then have to figure out, where do I go? Can I afford it? When we talk about affordability, we're talking about affordability not just with public housing, but housing in general. And so those are two different terms that are sometimes being interchangeable and they should not be.
Thanks, Kelly.
But thank you.
Patrick, I told you I'm gonna tell you, I'm coming to you, Michelle.
All right.
And I got the big stopwatch.
Preparing for this, I was doing a little research on gentrification, and I'm going to reference my rule number 1. People always make value-based decisions. If you look at gentrification, there are a lot of economists that would argue that gentrification is a natural cycle in economic development. If you look at the way cities are developed, they developed at their core first. People tend to, the only spot to have new housing was on the outside of that core, so people tend to ascribe more value to something that's newer, so they move to the outer rim. That area starts to decline, they move to another rim. At some point, housing that's in the center has outlived its useful economic cycle, so people on the outer rim decide there's a reinvestment opportunity on the inner rim, and it starts all over again. So I would argue these challenges we have, we cannot sit here and say gentrification won't happen because people live by rule number 1. They're going to make a value-based decision, and that's what drives this cycle. We have to figure out how to develop and work at things understanding that value-based cycle that people work on.
Time, Patrick. Michelle? Look, I'm holding it up high.
I agree with you totally, and girlfriend down there, amen. Because we kept using the word systemic and these things as it relates to policy, but when you change the dynamic of what the place looks like, then if I say 3,500 blacks have moved out, then you've now changed who the policymakers will be for that area. So you got to be careful. So we got Manchester. Manchester's growing. We want to change the name from Blackwell. We want to do all of those types of things. But in that, you got a rental property that's $300,000. So you're not, there has to be a deliberate to not gentrify.
Right.
And that's what's happening. There is not a deliberate to not gentrify. It's like there's white flight, then we let it go down, now white flight back in, and then the 90-year-old, the 80-year-old, and everybody else is pushed out when there is not a deliberate to say, no, we're going to come back in, but we're going to make sure that it's not gentrified. And that's through not having policy change, because we don't no longer have
Thanks,
black people.
Michelle. Damon?
Why do I always have to come after this?
We're going to start at the other end of the table.
I'm not as fiery as she is. But I will say this, and you're absolutely right about the urban core and the values and all of that. I'm not going to rehash that, but I will say this. Gentrification would not be a problem if the resources weren't distributed based on race.
That's it. Yep, that's it.
you know, if I could take this conversation, because I like to, you know, the symmetry between the housing industry and the school industry, in my estimation, it runs a parallel track. If in fact the resources were in the community, our education systems would be better, our housing would be better, and so on and so forth. If, you know, people of a different persuasion were within our schools, we would have better schools. So gentrification is not the bad word. It's just, you know, the powers that be and the racial implications associated with the resources coming with the different races that are gentrifying the community. That's the problem, not the idea, because...
Time. Sorry, Damon. We're gonna come back doing our Q&A, but fair and in order.
So one of the tools to deal with gentrification is a Richmond Land Bank. It's run by the Maggie Walker Community Land Trust. And the way land banks work is this. They get the tax delinquent and vacant properties from the city, and they get them redeveloped, and they sell them to folks. But the land bank continues to own the land. The only thing that's sold is the structure on top of it. What that does is it reduces the cost of housing by about 20%. And that makes it more affordable to folks in otherwise gentrifying areas. And what that helps do is to build wealth, which is a huge problem for people of color who have been denied wealth since basically forever. But if people of color can start buying these properties, the structure, then they get to build wealth, and when they sell it, other people can buy the structure, and it's less costly because they're not having to buy the land underneath that's also gone up in value. This is going to start in the summer of 2019. We need to keep an eye on it to make sure it works the way it's supposed to.
Time. Just my comment on that, I call BS. The bottom line is this, okay, the American dream is to own land, okay, that's the American dream, okay, realistically, that's the dream, okay, I mean, that's just the bottom line. And the bottom line is this, okay, it's nice, I set in on the Maggie Walker Land Trust or whatever and stuff, but be clear, when someone owns your land, if you want to put a shed on your land, you can't even do that. Now, is that something that may can work out for our seniors or somebody, you know what I'm saying, disabled that can't till the land and things of that nature? Absolutely. But one of the things that insults my intelligence, and this is no disrespect, when white people come up with all of these warm and fuzzy ideas of what they think is beneficial to us, that we're not entitled to everything else. Teach us how to buy the land. Okay, teach us how to do our own land trust. Delegate McQuinn, help me.
But it's not only owning the land or the property. When I lived in Churchill 35 years, okay? And individuals who wanted to just have their property renovated and fixed up could not get the resources from the investors or the bankers to get it done. It is bankers, it's developers, and they said, we'll lend to you, but I will not lend to you. Okay? That's how it works, and that's why we're in the situation that we're in. And I don't know how, when I say that the camel's nose is in the tent, I don't know if there's going to be a paradigm shift now. Because we're already at a place where culturally it's changing, politically it's changing. I am not sure if anything else is going to work in our benefit unless we, by design, policy is put in place to say, you know what, Miss So-and-so, you've been there for your family's been there for the last 100 years. You don't have to move. Even if the taxes go up, we're going to find a way to help you to stay in your home. This was going to have to happen. And those who remain there could possibly remain. But as I said, the camel's nose is in the tent. I don't know what is going to change at this point.
President Reiner, do you want to say something?
No, I'm good.
Okay, the other thing that we have to do is we have to educate ourselves and know, okay? Because if we don't know, you remember we watch movies with city slickers coming into town, they talk fast, and they say absolutely nothing. That has done now. I'm not saying Maggie Walker Land Trust is a bad thing. That's not what I'm saying at all. But what I'm saying is that I want to own me some land. Okay? I want to own me some land. And so if that works for you, that's fine. But one of the things I want to touch on is what Damon touched on, is something that we never talk about, and that's education redlining. Okay? Let's talk about that. Patrick?
I was just going to say, when we were talking policy, one of the things that I think we need to think about when you're talking development, people living in areas and gentrification, is the tax structure that's around that. And again, I want to say this is not an association point of view, this is personal opinion. There is nothing that would prevent localities from saying, look, we're going to establish your property taxes based upon the dollar you paid at the time you bought the property, not what the asset value is today. Now that means other people are going to have to pay more, and it has a whole bunch of other issues. But that every locality has the ability to do tax abatements, and they could look at that if they want to, and that's your elected officials.
Time. We have a question.
My thing is, I had talked to a woman who had lived in a home for 50 years, and now her taxes have gone up to the point she said she's not able to afford it. Now she's got to sell her home. A two-part question is, I fall in the line of high poverty is what I call it, where you're not, your income's not too low, your income's not too high, and you are trying to fit in somewhere. So where do that includes me at? When I'm trying to rent somewhere, but my income is not high enough, but it's not low enough. Right. And I consider that high poverty, so where do I fit in?
Anyone want to tackle that question? Michelle?
Yes.
I'll give you that minute.
Amen. So what I'm seeing, sweetie, is not just the person renting having the issue, but even to the development problem. So when the local regular developer tries to get to the table, so that we have a thought process to help the person like you, we can't get to the table in the city because there's already a lineup of developers that have already been doing this for years. And so that's how things have changed in Churchill and changed on to Manchester, because there's a set of developers already in our city that can maneuver. And when you have the regular locals that come in and say, hey, I want to do real affordable housing, that's not 60,000, but it's real affordable housing, we're having a problem getting to the door. So that's why I once again say, we have to begin to rally together. We're going to have to put other things to the side and work with your passion. Your passion say, I can't move. And so we've got to begin to move together. We're a force when we're together, but we're a movement all together. When we are by ourselves, I'm a force, but together, we're a total movement. And so we have got to change the way, because local developers, little people, can't get to the table so that we can help the average everyday person get a regular rental property.
I have a issue with the gentrification. I was raised on Brooklyn Park Boulevard. We didn't have half the resources that I see now. I just moved back to Haynes Avenue, and I am surrounded by Caucasian neighbors. Don't bother me because I'm half Caucasian myself. This is the issue. Over the years, I bought 2 houses. All the loans, the special programs, and all of the special financing that's going on, if you buy your house in Churchill or Northside or different areas, you get all this special financing and special tax. Where was that when everybody else needed it? Now, since we're seeing more white people, all of a sudden we're seeing more special financing. And they're coming in groups, not one at a time. They get together and have meetings. They go to those meetings together.
And so my question is, why can't we?
That's just it right there.
We cannot hold people at fault for unifying. We have to hold ourselves at fault for not doing it, okay? Because we've adopted this colonization mentality of crab in a barrel. We would tear each other down. But also, answer to your question, Queens, is we have to start looking at who's on these decision-making boards. There are so many conflicts of interest on these boards because they sit on 3 to 4 to 5 to 6 boards. So the same decision makers are making the same decisions over and over again. You got to break them up. And you got to know how to infiltrate. And then I don't know about you, but I don't wait for an invitation to come to the table. I come to the table. I pull up a chair. If it ain't one, I bring one. That's what you got to do, okay? I don't wait for invitations at all, and that's what we have got to start doing. I want to come back to the panel. Yes, ma'am. Elaine?
One thing I was going to mention about the area around Brooklyn Park Boulevard where you're talking about, there is a lot of change going on. There is gentrification happening, but there is also an opportunity for building bridges and creating relationships across lines so that people understand your point of view of being a historic resident, the value that you bring as somebody who has lived in the neighborhood all your life or grew up in the neighborhood and your family has roots there and you bring value to the neighborhood. And let's build some relationships so that newcomers can, instead of calling the police or posting on Nextdoor, we'll talk to you and have a conversation and get to know each other. Because the village, the village is changing, so let's co-create that village.
Thanks, Elaine. We have a question from the audience.
Hi. Just really a statement to piggyback off of what she said and back to Ms. Mosby up the front. In regards to regentrification and our communities changing, I think a big part of that starts with us and us educating ourselves. I'm not a member of any board or anything, but I've been in the mortgage industry for 20 years. And I've done it from loan officer all the way up. And what I've seen in our neighborhoods, you have that grandma, you have that person that inherited the house, and someone comes to them and, hey, well, let me buy this from you. Hey, you're going to get $20,000. Yep. Oh my God, $20,000, and they sell for nothing when they could have gotten a loan, a FHA 203K rehab loan, or just a home like equity loan, whatever. There are so many things that they could have done, and they could have fixed up their own property. And when it was worth $100,000, now it could have been worth $250,000. But we're not educated. I can't get a loan, my credit's bad. FHA goes down to 580. Yeah. I mean, it's a lot of stuff out there, but we just don't know. So,
and we got issues. Thank you for that statement. Charles, after her, we got one in front, and then I want to go back to our panel.
I just want to say that I attended your Confronting Barriers Summit not too long ago under Home, and that was very informative, coming from the Department of Housing and Community Development. And one of the things that I kept noticing was how there was a correlation. I attended the gentrification panel, and one of the correlations was the cost, education, poverty, all these things. Being a native from Richmond all my life, it's very interesting that eviction has always been an issue. But what I found interesting now is that it's a hot topic and all of a sudden we are trending, but no one ever mentioned the correlation between this topic of eviction now in Richmond being a hot issue and gentrification, as far as, do you think that the eviction rates are higher now because they got a clean house to gentrify? So no one put two and two together as to why eviction all of a sudden, because like I said, people always been put out. It's just the way of nature in Richmond.
And you may have came in, Hunt, just a little late, but Martin outlined that for us in a great PowerPoint presentation where he actually showed that process, and then 72 years later, it still looks the same.
I was there at the gentrification lab for VCU, and I questioned them about it too. But yeah, I was just saying that they never correlated gentrification and eviction together. They said all of these other reasons as to why the eviction rates in Richmond was high, but they never put in gentrification as the reason why eviction rates all of a sudden are top rocket in Richmond.
There's a saying of Houston, we have a problem. Yeah. Okay, and the reason why I say that is because we sit and wait for people to make correlations that we already know. Okay, and one of the things, I'm not from Virginia, I'm from the north, I'm one of those northerners. Okay, but the one thing that we know that southerners are infamous for is hiding your history to make you feel better. Okay, and so it's not hidden, but if we don't talk about it, we act like it is. Okay, because no one wants to talk about it. No one wants to talk about what happened down in Shackled Bottom. No one wants to talk about that. No one wants to talk about the work that was done. No one wants to talk about the things that we built in this city. Because this way, if we don't talk about it, then we have to not, we talk about it, we have to acknowledge that we did something wrong. Okay, and so my thing is we have to constantly remind people, we know you did something wrong. We see you. Now, what are you going to do to fix it?
You said there was one more?
Yes, Mr. Garrett.
Yeah, my question is for Mr. Dane and your presence with the RIHA. I read some articles of what you're doing for us. You're doing a walk around. That's good. You can't find out what's going on with these people in the project without participating in what really actually is going on. So you said you were gonna tear down the Creighton Court? Who has preference to move in those apartments that you're moving up now? Who has first preference to move in there?
And I think we're going to table that, and the reason why, Mr. Garrett, because we're going to be talking about Project Fail as a whole. That's going to be one of our major topics, and he's going to address that in there. So, with that being said, okay, one of the things that we're going to talk about is Project Fail. Okay, and the reason why we say Project Fail, because people seem to think that the developments, and this is no slight on RRHA, this is the developments nationwide, is a failure, period. It has desensitized our people, it has enabled our people, it has given us this sense of entitlement and this lackadaisical, lazy attitude that we can't do better. And we have bought it hook, line, and sinker.
Yeah.
Hook, line, and sinker. And so when I met this gentleman, I specifically asked him what was the plan, because I don't believe in going to what there. So let me tell you from experience, and then I'm going to go to Damon, then I'm going to go to Patrick, I'm going to go to Elaine, and then I'm going to come to Michelle. And the reason why I did that order, because of their knowledge in there, and then I'll let everyone else chime in, okay? HUD gave all developments a Dear John letter in November of last year. Right, Charles? It was November of last year around? Of last year, okay? And what that Dear John letter said is, Dear developments, we're not giving you any more money. We're not. We can no longer afford it. Capital funds have now gone down or depleted. And then what happened is, the idiot got in office, and he did a shutdown. Okay, and so that shutdown hurt because funds had to be pulled from other areas to cover subsidy and rent for our most disenfranchised people. So now the bank got even lower. We keep saying, I'm sorry.
Okay.
There is no more money. So we keep hearing people say, don't tear it down, why don't you fix it? The product is obsolete. Okay, how many of you are still driving a 1927 Get Up and Push? That's because the product is obsolete. That doesn't say the people in there are obsolete and they don't need help. We need to put those measures. That means that you can no longer patch it, tuck it, fix it, but they don't even sell some of the parts anymore. So now, public housing nationwide has got to go to private investors to get money. Private investors are not going to invest money in a product that cannot be fixed. It is cheaper for them to tear it down and to rebuild. Where we come in is we have to have someone like this that has the knowledge on how to transition that where our people are not crushed and stepped over. So I want to talk about Project Fail, and I want to talk about panel, the fact that we, and Michelle, I'm coming to you first because you already know my conversation. I want to talk about why we celebrate someone living in the projects for 40 years. Project Fail. I want to talk about why we give awards to people for 40 years. I want to talk about people in public housing today that is making $80,000 a year. Living in public housing, and their only reason for not leaving is, what if I lose my job? What if you don't? There is people in public housing that is making more money than some officials, and they are still living in there paying at max $200 rent. You have market renters that live in public housing. There are people that are living in public housing paying $850 rent, and they are living in public housing. That is a Project Fail. There is something wrong. The system is wrong. We should not be having third and fourth generations of families living in public housing. We should not be debating that my mama lives in Mosby, but my aunt lives over here. That's a general curse that we've got to break, the poverty mindset. Because if we don't, HUD has now told us it's going to be broken for us. How are we going to prepare our people? Damon?
Well,
whoa.
You did an excellent job. You did. I always have to
Get
follow
set up.
people. Maybe that means I have to do a better job of being prepared, I guess. But I do want to say, before I go into when Tracy and Michelle talked about being at the table, one of the first messages that I got when I started the position on March 25th was, you got a meeting request for Monday morning, your first day with the NAACP. I said, oh my goodness. But we didn't have the meeting on the first day, but I think we did have it on the first week, and since, I think we met 2 or 3 times since. But to her point, she doesn't just talk about it, they actually, they be about the business of being at the table. They wanted to know who the new leadership was and what his or her philosophy was on transitioning and transforming public housing. And we did have a number of discussions with that. And from those discussions, they saw fit to have me on the panel. So thank you for that.
That's right.
But you are absolutely right. The resources that the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development have been providing have been dwindling over the years. And the state of the Gilpins, Mosby, is what's been known infamously as the Big Six here in town. I've been working in public housing for a long time. It's the first time I've heard of a name for a collection of this. But the Big Six, as you come to know it, has fallen in extreme disrepair. As recently, no one is a stranger to the heating issues and some of the other issues that plague obsolete housing. Hence the reason for a person like me to come to town, because the transformation is long overdue. I said at a news conference a couple of weeks ago that the units have exceeded their useful life by at least 15 to 20 years. So I don't backtrack on that statement, but I have made statements about doing sweeping transformation, and it's been talked about before, but I think now you have a board. One of our commissioners is here today, Ms. Heidi Abbott, a board that believes that transformation across the whole realm of public housing is needed, and some of the things that I talked about in the interview process was somewhat shocking for them, and they weren't sure that the general public would be ready for it, but ultimately they did buy in and they did agree that a complete overhaul of not only the housing authority, but its primary public housing family properties need a severe transformation. So we're going to be moving aggressively toward that. And I'm a champion of residents. We've been called several names since we've been here. This is the first job I had where I've been called names. I've been called I'm the white guy with a black face, and just a number of things. But it all just speaks to the passion that individuals have for what's going to happen in the community. They want to make sure that it happens responsibly and not in a way that displaces residents, and I can assure you that that won't be the case. But we're very passionate about this work. This work is long overdue. It has a tremendous economic impact toward the city of Richmond if we're able to transform the properties, and we'll all enjoy an increased level of affordability, not just the 30%ers are under, but as the 30%ers transition into 50% or 80% of area median income, because we don't like to talk about it, but we do find a way to do better. And as we do better, we don't need to just jump to $300,000 homes. There need to be a matriculation so that we can continue to have healthy families and a good quality of life. So we're going to be moving expeditiously, as we said in the past. We got somebody to stand up and raise their hand. But we're going to be very deliberate about transforming public housing, because it cannot stay in its continued state. Okay. I don't know if you want to take this question.
Yes, I'll take your question.
Who question was it?
She come with the mic. She need the mic.
Okay.
I'll take your question, but there were 2
And
others
then we
before.
get the 2 people that was before you, and then we'll move on.
On this topic,
What is your
Yeah,
wishes?
take her question, and then will the 2 people who had questions before please stand up so when she's finished, we
Good
can
morning,
go.
afternoon, everyone. I just want to ask, since you're talking about Richmond redevelopment housing, it had a program where it trained people to better themselves and also preparation for home ownership. What happened to that? Because I knew of a few people that was on the track of building their lives up with this program, and then it went flat, or either it was like the attention was taken away from helping people to live there a few years and then move on, because that was the goal, to not stay stuck.
Well, that's a very important question. I'm glad that you asked that. And the answer is very simple. The dollars went away. HUD, there was a day and time when HUD funded supportive services to a great degree. Now they provide enough administrative monies for a couple of positions, but the services, the Boys and Girls Club, the computer learning centers, and all of the wonderful things that we used to enjoy, the funding for that has gone away because HUD's position is we're in the business of housing, but the Housing Authority needs to be diligent about partnering with the service providers that receive funding from various other sources to provide those services. So that's kind of what happened, where the Housing Authority doesn't take the lead on it, but there's some nonprofits and other supportive services provider in the community that receive funding specifically for that.
Thank you. Ma'am?
Hi. Can I chime in on that?
Yes.
Do you mind if I chime in on that?
Who's that?
Hello, up here?
Oh, Elaine, I'm sorry. Oh, yeah, I was like, wait a minute, who is that?
So just to chime in on the supportive services that are being provided currently, right now Richmond Opportunities has our office right at the East Lawn Shopping Center, where we house 4 transition coaches that are working directly one-on-one with individuals who live in Creighton Court. Creighton Court is undergoing a planned redevelopment. It's been in plans for many years now, but with renewed commitment from the Housing Authority, it's continuing to move forward. We have 4 coaches that are meeting people where they are. People's first personal goal may not be they want a new place to live. Their first personal goal might be, I need to find a doctor. And so those coaches are addressing all of those determinants, social determinants that are going to ensure that people are in a position to even be successful in training and be successful in employment, and then maybe they can consider being ready for new housing. There are just so many barriers to transition successfully and transition to a place where people are truly going to be thriving and in a better position for themselves and their families. So
Thank you.
That's really what the coaches are focused on.
Michelle, you want to chime in?
Yes, and Help Me Help You, the nonprofit organization, will be in the Calhoun Center beginning June 7th, living in financial excellency, helping to teach those financial, not just if you're planning to purchase, but getting prepared for what's next. And so we'll be there June 7th, 608-9703 is our number, 608-9703, and we'll be out there June 7th because we have to prepare. Something is happening with HUD, and we know that, and so to keep saying we're not preparing doesn't make any sense. So we're out there ready to prepare. So we hope that you would tell people, and let's get people ready to be prepared for what's next in their life.
Thank you, ma'am.
Good point. What's next in life? I have a question for Martin. These rules that HUD have about what a landlord looks like or a tenant looks like, when are they ever rewritten to be appropriate for the time? Because many of those rules and regulations were written many, many years ago, and that's what I feel we're talking about now, what it used to be. So do you have any insight on the rules and laws that they're changing at this point, or even in discussion, so that life can be made better via housing?
So that's a lot to unpack. So changing the statute's really hard. because obviously both houses of Congress and the president's got to agree to it, and they can't agree on anything right now. And HUD has to write regulations and guidances and handbooks that follow the statute that has been written. And so these regulations stay in effect for years and years and decades. Now, HUD does come up with new ideas from time to time that follow the statute, and one of them I think Mr. Duncan was referring to. He was talking about the RAD program, which stands for, help me out here, because I've got a rental assistance demonstration, yeah. And I was thrilled to hear Mr. Duncan say that there's not going to be any displacement, because people have to live somewhere. And I'm thrilled to hear him say there's not going to be any displacement. It's going to be a real tricky thing to transition from the dilapidated stock that your past two predecessors said exactly the same thing. We can't continue the current Big Six. It's dilapidated. There's not enough money to keep them up. We have to do something different. And you're the guy who's going to be doing it. So we support you on that. We're going to hold you accountable on that piece of no one being displaced. And I appreciate your commitment to that.
Time. Sorry, Martin. And just to piggyback on that, we're sitting at the table, so we're not on guests watching. The NAACP is sitting at the table with RRHA on this transition to make sure that, I can tell you that he's a man of his word, okay? And you brought up a valid point about the last two predecessors, okay? And you're right on the point. But what we're not going to allow to do is we're not going to allow the lynch mob to come out and run somebody out that is doing something that's right. That's not what we're going to allow to happen. So if you go run tell anything today, spread that. We are not going to allow this man to be run out of town with foolishness. Okay, there's work to be done. Yes, I'll come back to you in 1 minute, ma'am.
Is there any training for these landlords and developers, or are they left to their own license to do what they want to do because of economics?
There's not a training to be a landlord, but there are laws and legislation to teach them and guidelines. The problem is, again, and I'm going to say it again, the correcting the issue starts with us, not them. We don't hold people accountable. We vote for people who we like or who our friends like. We've got to stop allowing people to come into our neighborhoods and entertain us and bring us hot dogs and kiss our babies when they want to be elected, and then you don't see them anymore. So it starts with us.
Yes, my voice is kind of...
You're fine, Queen.
All right. I'm like you are. I'm not from here either. I'm from New Jersey. Okay, I'm a northerner. But I've been here since '78. I've been here. I know I'm not, I will never be. Okay, I'm a Jersey girl. So what I'm going to say is that I was here in '78 when it was all white on Chamberlain Avenue, okay? My mother was the first black to go into 3211. And we grew up in New Jersey where there was only Jewish people and Italians. So when I came down here, it was totally a shock to me that there was even happening. But my question and my statement is to the panel. I am a retired school teacher, along with other education, medical background. But my problem is that I worked at 17th Street Farmers Market as a vendor. I was a vendor there for more than 10, 15 years, selling children's books. And when they decided to change 17th Street Farmers Market, my two ladies that's down there now, along with Mr. Christian, had been there for decades, okay? Their four parents was there. And their four parents were there. They're in the ground, called the grandfather's clause. They wanted to move them, and they did. They wanted to move us, and they did. We have been down there so long, and you would have thought when they made all the changes, yes, they did have us at the meetings. So you're saying being educated. I'm a well-educated woman. If you ask about the book lady, they'll tell you, oh my God, here she comes. Because I am
and
that
you're saying 17th Market, that's what you said when they tore it down.
Farmers Market.
Okay. And we're gonna ask you to stick around later, because I'd like to have some conversation with you and get educated from you on some stuff, definitely. So we're gonna jump back to our panel, and I'm coming to you, Kelly.
I wanted to respond to them.
Okay.
Was that her question?
Yeah, there's a question.
Oh, okay.
I want to know what happened, what is going to happen, because the gentleman there said they won't be removed or they be replaced, I believe, I'm not sure. Displaced, thank you very much. But we were displaced when they changed 17th Street Farmers Market, and we have not been placed yet. In fact, the two young ladies, and I call them young ladies, they're older women, and Mr. Christian that's out there on the street with no cover, Miss Rose and her sister in the back, near the bathrooms. Tell me, how did they get there if they wasn't, when they beautified it, what happened?
Let me answer your question, because, and I want to make sure that we're clear. So you're talking about people who were in 17th Street Marketplace, and when they did the whole beautification, they got displaced. Okay, got you. That would actually have nothing to do with this panel here, but I can answer your question because you're dealing with commercial, and you're dealing with commercial real estate. So I'm going to come to you in the back, and I'm going to bring Damon with me, and we're going to answer your question, because that's not housing.
It's not housing, but it's Richmond.
No, that's it. I agree with you. That's Richmond City, but commercial real estate is handled totally different. Okay, so we're going to come to you with that. So definitely that you can have an answer. Kelly, give me 1 minute. Go ahead.
So I was getting ready to respond to the young lady talking about federal regulations. I was at a conference called Housing Is this past Thursday and Friday, and I spoke to someone at HUD, and I said, so how can we, I said, I'm from Richmond, Virginia, how can we talk about public housing becoming low barriers? And she said they are working on the federal level, and so no one can willy-nilly do what they want to do, but you think about the federal government, as far as HUD, brings down a mandate. However, the Housing Authority has an annual occupancy plan that speaks to the federal level, but then there's some internal changes that may be made that may not directly impact what the federal government and regulations have said. And so if we are not knowledgeable on those things, we're making the assumption that we're referring to regulations from 10, 15, 20 years. No, they're current regulations, but what does the local housing authority actually utilizing those regulations impact the families and the communities that's being served?
And that's why it's again so important that those of us constantly say the same song, know your rights. Know your rights. No one's going to teach it to you like you can teach it to you. Research, but there are people out there. Mr. Bradley is one of them. I'm one of them. Seminars, I kid you not, I gave a landlord-tenant seminar twice already. The first time packed with tenants. The second time, not one tenant showed up. I had a room full of landlords. Okay, so yeah, and we helped some, and we taught some. So know your rights. I'm gonna take your question, and then I'm gonna go back to the panel.
If I may, real quickly, I want y'all to know that, as Tracy has said, the NAACP, we are here to help. I did share with the young lady that was dealing with the issue. As community coordinator for the NAACP, I'm going to deal with her issue directly.
Right.
So hers won't go unheard. We're going to deal with yours directly.
I'm new to this, so I don't know where to begin. But as a minority, Michelle, I'd like to speak up, and I appreciate you speaking up as you have, because I have experienced it. I'm from out that area, and I have transitioned out of it, but it's still hard. But my question is, because I want the education on how to maneuver and to help. I want to be a part of it, to be honest. And I need to know, like, I want to know everything, really. How to get involved, how to help my people, because I am witnessing and seeing what they're doing, and I know they can do better because I talk to them. But it's just they don't have, which a lot of other people have, other cultures as well, because I learned to be universal because I've been in Chesterfield and in Richmond. So it's not about that with me, about racism. It's more about helping my people because I can see the potential, but nobody's giving them the guidance. So my question is, how can I get trained into doing this? Because right now I'm in school, to be honest. I'm in school right now, taking up like physical training, so forth. It's called ACE, American Council of Exercise. But I'm applying it because I want to bring that back to the community, to give them a gateway and show them how to unify.
So you just answered your own question.
And I want to learn, but I want to learn.
Good, go back there and grab a business card, grab 2 cards. One, help me help you, and the NAACP card, and we're gonna get you started. Grab those cards. So I'm
Excuse me,
coming back
Tracy,
to,
are you- I just wanted to.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to check, are we moving on to another subject?
Yes, we're moving on to another
Do you mind if I
subject.
say something?
Not at all.
Okay, about public housing redevelopment. I just wanted to share something that, we talk a lot about Richmond's history, and we talked earlier about the history of redlining. I just wanted to read a quote that came from the chairman of the Richmond Housing Authority. It wasn't and redevelopment at that time, but the Richmond Housing Authority in 1941. The chairman, William Meacham, said, "The transformation of the slums into areas which will contribute to the culture of the society is our goal." So, back in 1941, the decision makers at the Housing Authority were saying the same thing and using the same words. So how can we be sure that now, in this effort towards transformation, it's not going to result in the same failures as in the past?
I'm gonna
And I think
I'm sorry, because we're running down the time, so I'm gonna take that first part of your question, and I'm gonna come back to you when we do free for question, because I want to get Patrick in here. But one of the things that I want to be clear when we're talking about housing is, from the quote that you read, back when that quote was read, that quote didn't apply to us, because public housing was originally built for white people. Okay, so
But it was built.
It was Gilpin Court and all of them were not built for African Americans.
It wasn't, however, it was built on African American homes.
Okay, and so, no, they weren't homes, they were shacks. Okay, there's a difference. And the other thing about that is, think about that, it was built, but when we started this dialogue, we talked about systemic, was that word. The same powers to be are still the regulators of this system, and it's never been dismantled. And so the funny thing is that what I said to Damon, and I was really real when I met with him, is as African Americans, when a white face comes and they sit in our RHA, we don't question them. We entrust that they're going to do what's best for us. That man won't even in office 30 days, and the lynch mob was already ready to run him out of town. Okay, so I think that when we have these conversations over and over again to come up with solution, when we bring up historical dialogue, we have to bring up historical facts to support them.
Thank you for providing the context around that, but what I was getting at is it is the same type of power dynamic that is in place now, and we need to engage members of the community that are directly impacted by these decisions.
Totally.
And people need to be listened to and not just informed.
I totally agree, Patrick. I'm gonna come to Patrick, and then, because Michelle, I'm gonna start with you and Martin on my next question. Go ahead, Patrick.
I just have to chime in for a moment. I don't try to get too emotional on some things, but I gotta be honest with y'all, HUD pisses me off. It is the most inefficient organization I've ever had to freaking deal with. And the change has to start with the people in this room and who we elect. I went around Capitol Hill this March talking about how we need to reform the Housing Choice Voucher Program. Every single member of Congress said, let me know when you have something, we'll take a look at it. Not a single damn one of them wants to actually get out there and draft something and take the time to make this a priority issue. That comes from us sitting there saying, housing needs to be a priority. I expect you to do something about it. We are not holding them accountable for it, and none of them are doing their job on this issue. It starts with every elected official, whether it's City of Richmond, whether it's federal government, or whether it's Congress.
Totally agree.
Sorry, I don't
totally agree. The next question that I want to come to is one, and Michelle, I'm coming to you first. In April of 2016, HUD issued a groundbreaking guidance explaining that criminal record screening policies may violate Fair Housing Act. Although the fate of the guidance is uncertain, the underlying legal justification of the guidance still provides the foundation for a FHA challenge to such policies. Now more than ever, there is a growing interest in advancing laws and policies to support justice-involved individuals so they can truly reunite with their communities and have a place to call home. We keep talking about restoration of rights, but to restore something means to put it back the way you found it. Michelle?
So Help Me Help You is to decrease poverty and to help reintegrate returning citizens. That's the goal. What I found in the last, well, what I've known, but have really, really honed in on is policy has to change, but it's going to take a groundswell. And that's, it's not just even that, but it's education, and we skipped it. And I'm hoping I get to have a moment with it. But it's going to take a groundswell. I have 2 young men today who work for the city of Richmond. They did 23 years in prison, and yet they can't find any housing. Yo, something's wrong with that. Something is majorly wrong with that. And then the thought process is, if you've murdered someone or if you were a sex offender, then that statute is forever. So that means I've come back out here, and 2 of my gentlemen, when I tell you they are the founder of RVA League, so they're helping other children intertwine their lives. They are cross-pollinating Jackson Ward and Hillside so that they're not having these fights. He can't get no housing. He pays taxes like a regular citizen, but when it comes to the other piece of this thing, he can't move forward. Another young man, an ambassador for the Office of Community Wealth Building, can't get no housing. Something is wrong with the way that the policies and laws are set. However, we started with the word systemic, and it is because the dynamics have changed on who's sitting in the seats, based on who's living in the areas and the neighborhoods. And so we are now not having policies that are derived for us, by us, making some sense to us. And so our people are perishing. I'm saying to you, we have to get together. Son in the back, we gotta get together. And we have to begin to sit down and meet with Martin, meet with the legislators, and begin to change policy so that it affects the people that our people, so that it can make some real change. We have to change policy, y'all. We have to change it, and it is going to take each and every one of you to help change that policy. You can't sit at home and see the problem and not help change policy. You are necessary for the movement. You're necessary.
Thank you, Martin.
So I've done training on that HUD guidance for lots and lots of property managers, hundreds of them. And I usually pick on the first couple of rows, group of men and women, and I ask them to come forward and stand up and order themselves in height order from shortest to tallest. And then I size them up and I say, if you are under 5'7", sit down. And most of the women will sit down, and most of the men will not. And I say, what just happened here? And what just happened here is I excluded the women, and I did not mention gender at all. I used height. And then I say, every time you ask about criminal history, you are doing exactly the same thing to people of color because of the era of mass incarceration. And then I ask them, well, what do you really need to know when you are looking at a prospective tenant? And I say, you need to know 3 things. 1, do they have enough money to pay the rent? 2, do they have a good rent-paying history? And 3, do they have a good history of being a good tenant and a good neighbor? Now, criminal history might affect that 3rd question a little bit, but what the HUD guidance says is this. If the landlord is asking about arrests, they're violating fair housing, because arrests prove nothing. You were suspected of crime, you were not shown to have done anything illegal. If they ask about a blanket conviction, whether you were convicted of anything at any time, anywhere, they're violating fair housing. Because a conviction, anytime, anywhere for anything, doesn't show your suitability or unsuitability as a tenant. And if they even narrow it down to only these crimes for only this period of time, and the HUD guidance says if it's more than 6 years old, it does not predict anything. If you are incarcerated and released and you serve 6 years, you're out of prison for 6 years, your risk of offending, the likelihood you're going to offend is no greater than if you've never offended at all. So they can't look back more than 6 years. And they can't look at every crime, just very selected ones that would show whether you are or not risky as a tenant. And even if you've hit that crime in that time period, they have to consider your individual circumstances, an individualized assessment to show what have you done to rehabilitate yourself. If it was a drug crime, have you gone to drug rehab? If it was a crime of assault, have you done anger management? That type of stuff. They have to look at how old the conviction was, what it was for, how old you were, and what you've done since. We have collected tenant selection policies from dozens of landlords, and not a single one follows the rules that I've just mentioned. Absolutely. And they're all violating fair housing, and they're all impacting people.
Patrick, I'm gonna come to you.
Professional, but has gone through their credit selection or their screening criteria to assess that. The other thing I think people fail to think about in this, it's not that people don't want to rent to someone. People want to rent to someone. Every management company out there has to go through the worst case scenario of, if I rent to someone with a criminal history and something happens again, I can now be sued and be liable for that action. There is no tort reform protection for a landlord if they rent to anyone with a criminal history. I will say that's why we've already drafted and have it prepared to put in this year legislation that would offer some protection on that. Certainly hope that's something the NAACP would support. But keep in mind, there's a two-way street on this, because, look, love to rent to people if you can tell me that I am never going to get sued for renting to that person if something happens.
And that's pretty much the fear. Kelly, did you want to chime in?
Not at the moment.
Not at the moment. Michelle?
I just want to respond to Patrick.
Go ahead, Martin.
I just want to respond to Patrick. That may be a valid fear, but we've looked at the law, and we can't find a single reported case. There may be unreported, there may be settlements. We can't find a single reported case where a landlord was actually held responsible for the scenario that you described. It may happen, but we can't find a case.
One of the things, I'm gonna come to you, Michelle, but one of the things that I do want to mention is the ironic part of this is African Americans convicted of white collar crimes. African Americans convicted of white collar crimes are totally treated different than someone who slung drugs, rape, murder, totally different, okay? I know someone who got charged for a bad check, which is a white collar crime, that they didn't even commit. And 20-something years later, they still cannot get housing. They won't even allow him housing, and he has to pay with a money order. He just can't get housing. Because, truthfully, and this is not your truth, because you're a lawyer, I'm talking about my truth. Truthfully, it's insulting to the system when an African American commits a white collar crime. Let me say that again. It's insulting to the system when an African American is convicted of a white collar crime.
Explain.
We're expected to be drug dealers. We're expected to steal, rob, kill. Those are the expectations. So how dare you come in my courtroom and stand before me a writing a bad check? And that's the truth. That's our reality. That's not the reality of this gentleman as a good attorney, but I'm talking about our reality, okay? And if you don't believe me, pick up a newspaper and see the differences in sentencing for African Americans convicted of white collar crimes. And then look at the sentences. It is ridiculous that someone gets sentenced for writing a check more than someone that shot someone in the hood. It makes absolutely no sense. Ma'am?
I wanted to say my son had an assault charge over 17 years ago. He went to North Carolina, went to school, became a technician. He has 3 children, and this man works diligently every single day. He can't even get a home under his name. His wife has to do everything, and she has to critique and make sure some way that she does not apply his name. And he should not have to go through that, because he can show that he has been a conductive citizen and only doing what a father's trying to do.
And that's a good point. I'm gonna go to you, Michelle.
Well, that goes back to what you were saying about being sued. Well, what I'm saying is that in all of it, there is this word, there is this thing that keeps us from moving forward. Like how long? How long should this be? Even into the HUD guidelines, how long? We tried to go and do a pilot program. Help us do 2. And they're vetted through us. That we're saying that these people have, like you, put themselves back out here. They have no longer done any crimes. They are moving forward. Let us work it through us. And still, we're having a moment in time where the powers that be are saying, well, we could possibly be sued. At some point, there has to be something else done so that people can move forward. That is ridiculous. It is majorly ridiculous. It is no more ridiculous than, like I said, my other 2 young men that are now serving to help other young generations behind them to not go the place that they went, and they can't stand up and say, young man, I now own a house that I purchased. I now work for the city of Richmond. That's the story that they need to tell. But they can't, because the powers that be are keeping them from telling a whole story.
Time. Before I come to you, Stephen, I want to go to Damon, because it's important, because when we're talking about multi-family housing and we're talking about public housing, we're talking about 2 different situations. So Damon, I'm coming to you.
An important distinction between the Housing Choice Voucher Program and the Public Housing Program that a lot of people don't realize is that the Public Housing Program essentially is a operating subsidy and capital fund program whereby the Housing Authority manages a portfolio or a series of capital assets that is owned by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. So we're the management agent on behalf of those properties. The Housing Choice Voucher Program is a program where we administer subsidy, rental subsidy to individuals to rent homes owned by private landlords within the city of Richmond and surrounding areas. And there's a different set of guidelines associated with that. Oftentimes people talk about public housing and Section 8 as one program, when it is not. It's 2 distinctly different programs. And when we talked about public housing going away, we didn't talk about the subsidy that tenants receive, the rental subsidy. We just talked about the mechanism, and that mechanism of operating subsidy and capital funds through what's become known to us as projects is in fact going away, and we're converting into a project-based voucher model, which Congress and HUD has been adamant about funding, and we've seen increases in that funding historically over the years. So that's the fundamental difference that we wanted to clear up about the 2 programs, because a lot of people think of them synonymously and interchangeably, and they're used that way oftentimes by people that really should know better, but I just wanted to clear that up.
And so as our time winds down, did you guys have fun? Because I did. I hope you leave here enlightened. I just want to thank our supporters, the Crossley Coleman Group, Enlive and Global Media, United Communities Against Crime, Help Me Help You Foundation, ROI, Richmond Public Libraries, VAMA, Legal Aid Society, ServPro of Richmond, Tawana Griffin, Delegate Dolores McQuinn, all of my NAACP members, my esteemed panel, and all of you that joined us. We're going to end our panel, but we're not going to end our discussion. Okay, I'm going to take one last question, make it a minute, or I'll chop you in the throat. Okay, and then I'm going to just ask my panel to please just come down and talk to people, get to know people, share a business card, share a number. Now, let me play bodyguard for Martin. Martin is not going to arbitrate your trial and your case here today. Okay? Legal aid has a procedure on how to do intake. You don't get to shortcut the intake situation because we got Martin. Martin has a bodyguard called my husband in the back. I promise you, we're going to pick him up and carry him out here. But he is willing to talk to you, maybe give you some input or whatever. But please do not attack him with pictures and photographs and 50,000 things, because in all honesty, he's not trying to be disrespectful. Just like we have fair housing, legally, he has to go with things right in order. But give us your name and number and we'll get you help. So what's your question?
It's more so of a statement. I understand what you were saying about protection for the property owners or who have you, but this inherent fear is used as a whipping tool towards the people of color. There's no more different than that inherent fear than somebody who say, my kid's playing baseball and the ball hits through the window or any other type of damage. So I think that's a very unfair thing. And I understand this other aspect about 6 years or what have you, but what are you supposed to do from day one when you get out? So I'm supposed to just wallow in the wind and for 6 years or 7 years or whatever personal pre-qualification you have? That's a bunch of BS to me. You gotta give people a chance. If you walk out the door, if I buy a store, I pay taxes, then I should get the opportunity, or anybody, to do what you can for housing. Nobody should have to suffer, wait for the husband, wife, girlfriend, whoever to get something in order to survive and to go through hell.
I think that's a valid point, and I'm gonna ask you definitely to get with Patrick, and Martin, and think of this. We design the cultures that we put into place. Okay, when we don't restore people to go back to their family, we create a generation of liars and sneaks. Okay, because if I gotta sneak my man, I remember I grew up in New York City during the Claudine welfare system. And for anybody that's seen the movie, I lived it. Okay, I'm a product of public housing. I'm a product of the welfare system. Okay, I just happen to have a mother that didn't let her children stay in that. But I remember when they used to come to your house and search your closets and you had to hide your men's shoes and all of that. That stuff is real. Okay, and so there are people now that are living that every day. Okay, I want to acknowledge before we break a couple of people that are here. So Miss Tara, okay, thank you so much for joining us. Okay, she does a lot of phenomenal work in the community. Charles Williams, okay, who is, okay, it's been a long time. Is it still AVP or? Director of Public Housing for RRHA. Mr. Donald Garrett, who is an advocate for homelessness and seniors here. So if you have any issue, panel, thank you. And to the queen that allowed her husband to have him on a Saturday, we appreciate you. So panel, come on down. Thank you so much. I applaud you all. I applaud your honesty. I'm hoping after this it wasn't too hard, that we can definitely do this again and want to do it again. The next time that we get together, we will not be discussing the problem. We will be offering up solutions. Okay? If you have not thought about it, I'm taking my plug, not asking for a donation. There's work to do. If you're interested, there's NAACP applications in the back. All you have to do is write Housing Justice Symposium on the top so they know that I gave you an application. You don't have to commit to it today, but please consider it because there's work to be done. Martin has information in the back, Kelly, Damon, Elaine. So please come up, shake a hand, tell them if you like what you heard, and thank you all so much for coming out. And please take refreshments.
All right.